It's my show, ding dong.
Hello! Hello, it's January 4th, 2025. Happy New Year, folks. Happy New Year. Hope you're all well rested. The last weekend, I'm sure some of you were back at work already. Last week, I was technically back at work on Friday, doing some light stuff. I didn't have to be in the office, thank Zeus, but back at it, cracking away. Oh, had Friendsmas today, late Friendsmas. We did a Secret Santa gift exchange. I can show you what I got. It's really sweet. 1 second, I'll be right back. So one of the things I got, which is really sweet, was travel mug. But the travel mug, and it's kind of funny because of what this is my first story at the Hill Times, but it's new blood donation still targets queer men and trans women advocates argue. So it's kind of a funny thing to have as a mug, just walk around sipping that, but just shaming the liberals because they have been sort of, when they announced the new rules, trumpeting up that it was like, oh, you can yeah, it's a very nice mug and it's very sweet. I peaked a little on the train yesterday and I got kind of emotional because it's very sweet. But yeah, yeah, the new policy still bars like trans women and gay men who have had sex, anal sex, in the past 6 months, and those who take PrEP, which is kind of, I think, a little funny. The sound is fuzzy. 1 second, let's do some testing. Hot mic. Oh. It is. That the wire? Hello. 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 Okay, that seems a little bit better. Or a lot better. There's still like crackly a little bit. But do you hear that like clicking? Is the voice mod on? No. Oh yeah, I have a voice mod. Hello. No, that doesn't work. Sort of. Hello. Why is that not working? Weird. All right. Okay. Is that? I think we're better. Yes, it's Jordan B. Peterson and Pierre Poilievre, and their big, long form interview that everyone's been either thinking is the next frontier of political journalism, or have been rending their garments over it. So I thought I'd give it a watch. Oh, the other part of my gift, I got this it looks like a shooter glass, but it's a dice cup. And that's Elminster from, if you've played Baldur's Gate, you know who Elminster is. And it's like, it came with I don't know if you can see them, but I'll see if I can angle my little dice. Look how cute those are. Little cute little dice. So you can just roll my dice in there. Obviously not all at once. That'd be silly, obviously. So yes, that was my little gift. We had a $30 limit, so we weren't going crazy, but it was very sweet. Oh yeah, my big himbo elf paladin. We should get. That's what we should do. We should get back because we never actually finished that. I never actually finished Baldur's Gate. I'm still on like the third act. I'm still on. I should go back and like finish that game. All right, let's get into this. Yeah, edging Baldur's Gate.
So you take the total business investment of the United States divided by the total number of workers in America, it's 28 grand. In Canada, it's 15 grand. The Canadian worker gets about 55 cents for every dollar of his American, and they're both measured in USD. In Vancouver, more money goes to bureaucrats than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who build the place. And
someone who understands the economy, explain whether that's like that thing where he's dividing the like, was it GDP? I should go back to see what he...
Money goes to bureau every dollar of his... In Canada, it's 15 grand.
Oh, wait.
The Canadian States divided by the total number of workers. So you take the total business investment of the United States divided by the total number of workers in America.
Business investment. So not even GDP. Okay.
It's 28 grand. In Canada, it's 15 grand. The Canadian worker gets about 55 cents for every dollar of his American, and they're both measured in USD. In Vancouver, more money goes to bureaucrats than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who build the place. And to add insult to injury, tradespeople who build homes can't afford to live in them. Why is it that we're still importing oil when we've got the world's third biggest supply? Why is it we can't export our natural gas?
I think that was perhaps the single stupidest thing I ever heard a politician say. Your federal government spent $6,000 of your family's money going over their budget.
They've squeezed the taxpayer out of every last dime, and they're still $62 billion short.
It's worse than that because I suspect that the true picture is a lot more dismal than we know. Okay, so that's going to be dumped on you sometime in the next year.
They get...
I have a feeling... I'll say this. I don't think Poilievre's going to be the one that's going to make this a hard watch.
Party, I get the hangover.
8 years from now, what does it look like? Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity and the privilege today to speak with Mr. Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of Canada's Federal Conservative Party.
Did he have to check his notes for that?
Catastrophe, and God willing, Canada's next prime minister.
Well, if the leadership stuff is to be believed, but technically he may not be Canada's next prime minister. After the next election, maybe, but or most likely, but nah, maybe not technically the next prime minister.
A transition in power in this country is likely to take place sometime between March and October or November of 2025. And
October, fixed date election. Or fixed date legislation. Though, for the more conspiracy-minded folks, the Canadian Constitution mandates an election every 5 years. Ooh, discount Seth Rogen.
Oh,
Is that 25 months?
Oh, no, that makes sense.
Discount Seth Ridgen just subscribed for
Ridgen, discount Seth Ridgen.
What's this about 25?
It's 2025. We're in the 1 quarter, and all these people who are like, well, technically the 21st century started on January 1st, 2001. I'm like, well, nerd, shut up. That's what I have to say to that. Even as a proud, self-proclaimed pedant. Shut up, nerd. You gotta know when it just like it was a fun little New Year's post. The people who were like,
and will be the next prime
come on,
minister of
man.
Canada. And so I talked to Mr. Poilievre 2.5 years ago, which was quite shocking to me. I thought it had been more recently than that.
Oh yeah, I remember this one caused. Feel like this one caused a lot of like. Yeah, well, yeah, this one definitely caused a lot of basically the same people rending garments over it.
And a lot has transpired in the meantime. What did I talk about with Pierre? Well, I think mostly what I did was give Canadians and people on the international side a chance to see who this man is in an hour and a half of discussion, and the extra half an hour on the Daily Wire side. You have enough time to get a sense of how someone responds spontaneously and emotionally and cognitively to complex and challenging questions in a manner that's not rehearsed. That's the huge advantage of the podcast format. We talked about all the stories that Mr. Poilievre has heard in his thousands of event interactions with Canadians in industrial settings, in manufacturing settings, in academic settings, so that he could inform himself about the true situation that's facing Canadians struggling to make ends meet, despite their best efforts now, which is a dismal reality in Canada with its excessive housing prices and diminishing economy. Most importantly, perhaps, what is his vision of the future that both threatens and provides opportunity for Canadians? How is it possible for the citizens?
I guess this is for a mostly, I think, because it
malaise and pit that has.
I think like I don't know how many times was this viewed. No, this is that's the other movie, the Wacko movie they put out. But how much was this viewed on Twitter? Jordan, sorry, I know I'm surprised JBP didn't ask Pierre about faith in Christ. Like there was an embedded ad in the video about Christian. I mean, that is an interesting point. It would have been something you'd expect, especially with the way that Jamil Javani has been sort of highlighting the church burnings and the, I guess, as he would put it, the assault on Christianity, or rising anti-Christian sentiment, or however he would describe it. So probably in like a fairly like it's a good point that it is omitted, but I'm not actually surprised. Like they probably like there, I would imagine with this there was some there was some sort of pre-agreed. Like I don't know if Jordan Peterson, like even not even just like I don't think Jordan Peterson would have agreed to like give them a list of like pre-approved questions, but I'm sure there was probably an understanding of like it was less so much we're not going to talk about these things, but more so we're only going to talk about these things sort of thing. Like, I don't know. But yeah. Hey, Rogan. I mean, it's a notable like absence if they don't talk about it, but I mean, it's probably not a bad decision to probably stick to the more, I would assume, like, quote unquote, like kitchen table issues, like housing and immigration. I mean, I guess immigration isn't really a kitchen table issue, but in the current discussion of it, it has sort of tinged all of the things you would normally call the kitchen table issue. Hello, JMT. How are you? To you and RSJ, happy 2025. Welcome to the stream. First stream of the new year, off to a rockin' start. But I was gonna say this is quite a long intro, but I guess like I don't know how many times this has been viewed. Like Poilievre's tweet alone, with just it's the whole 1 minute hour and 40, the whole this is the whole video, but that's been viewed 1.9 million times on Twitter, though that's. Does that mean the video, like people, how much of the video have they watched? But like what, this 1.9 million people have seen this tweet in their timeline in some capacity, which is quite a decent amount for any sort of Canadian media. I don't know. Did Jordan Peterson tweet out the video? I don't know. Because all I'm seeing is like grooming gangs tweets. Or I've gone back too far. Did Jordan Peterson? Oh, this is his personal. Does he have a different account? Oh, Jordan B. Peterson podcast. Maybe that's it. Oh, there it is. So, yeah. So from that, so 41.6 million views. Holy shnikey. So that's on the, and I guess I can show you this, but this is just so I'm not making up numbers, but I don't know why you would think that. Yeah, so 41.6 million views, 10K retweets, 45,000 likes, 18,000 bookmarks. The 18,000 bookmarks is almost a better, because that's like, I mean, not a better one, but that's at least 18,000 people who wanted to come back to this and like either watch it or comment on it or something. So yeah, so that's a lot. So nearly 2 million on. So between these two, 43.5 million views just on those two tweets alone. And what's it on the YouTube? What are we at? Oh, Jesus. This has 1.6. That's what, yeah, 1.6 million views. So that's a lot on my end.
Being dug for them and by them over the last 9 years, and what could be done
Oh,
to
I'm going to snooze that.
remove the
Snooze for
impediments
5
such
minutes.
that
We're going to
this
get a
country
little
could
bit into this
become
video
the
at least.
dynamic industrial powerhouse that it certainly could.
Oh, counting the views, all that to say that I think this very long-winded intro, as Jordan Peterson said, is because this is, I think, almost primarily for a like non-Canadian audience. Or maybe not primarily for a non-Canadian audience, but like, as he said, this is an attempt to introduce Poilievre to a non-Canadian audience, to the American audience more specifically.
Easily become. So
off topic, but what is the Canadian version of Elon Musk pretending to be some random guy with a voice changer? Oh, well, we'll get to that, because apparently it might not actually be Elon Musk. It may be an almost more pathetic, which is an actual dude who just likes Elon Musk that much and has got, but we'll see. We'll read, there's reporting on it and we'll get to it and we'll see how, because there's apparently this dude might be connected to Musk's, like one of Musk's foundations. So it's like, is this dude like a fall guy? Because he comes out of nowhere right after that like Fortnite Friday thing that, where it seemed to establish that it was him. So this guy's coming out to like sort of as like a red herring, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
join us for all
Let's
that.
actually try and watch this for a
So,
second.
sir, it's been almost 2.5 years since we sat down to talk the time before. So I guess the first thing I'd like.
My God. Where is it? Computer enhance. 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 I'm gonna become the Joker. I'm gonna become the Joker. It's a goddamn app. I almost gotta give, like, it's, I almost, like, appreciate the attention to detail here. The, like, just the subtle set dressing. For the, it's like an Easter, it's a, like a, there's the federal conservatives have their own Easter eggs now.
Like to know is, what have you been doing during that time? I'd like to I'd like to hear.
Yeah, what have you been up
I'd
to?
like to hear about your
Anything
day-to-day
new?
schedule and your week-to-week schedule. Like, lay out your job.
Basically, we have two parts to my professional life. It's very bifurcated. There's the Parliament Hill side, which is early morning meeting with my leadership team, House Leader, Deputy Leader, Whip, etc., to plan out the day, the battle plan for our parliamentary committees, question period, etc. That is punctuated by one weekly caucus meeting and just the daily prosecution of the government, which is the quintessential role of an opposition leader. And then the other part to my life is touring. I asked my assistant today how many events we had done over the last year, and he said it was exactly 600. I mean, a few weeks ago it was 570 something. So we've done 600 events, and those are like tours at mills, mines, factories, farms, high-tech facilities, and we tour in, see how the place operates. Then I give a short speech, do a question and answer, and then I just mull about and shake hands with the workers for
Just mull about.
25 minutes to an hour, and then I go on to the next stop and do it all over again. And we did that in 9 provinces and 2 territories this year. And so that's a summary of my workload and work plan to do my job.
And you said 600 events. You made allusion when we were driving over here that the weekends are particularly packed, that you'll do like 10 events on Saturday or
Where
Sunday.
are they doing
Right.
this interview?
And so what a typical
It's
event,
just
what
in
do
a
you enjoy about
warehouse?
the events? Why are they useful?
put
and
2
what do you
seats-
learn?
Well, first of all, you get a practical insight into how the country actually works. Like who makes the widgets? How do those get made? How does our supply chain come together? What skill sets do these incredible workers have? What background qualified them to be a
What is
licensed
a widget?
welder, or to run a CNC machine, or to be the CEO of a 300-person company that supplies parts into the American economy?
Yeah, maybe
that
like an event
practical
space or
insight, I think,
whatever.
is important if you want to lead a government and a national economy. So you learn a lot. Then I get to hear the stories of the people who work in these places and get their feedback on what they want, what their dreams and aspirations are.
Yeah, I
And,
want to turn to that
Right.
in some detail. Let me ask you about the parliamentary side too, because I think it'd be useful for people to know how you prepare for what you do in Parliament. It isn't obvious to me that people exactly understand the business of being in opposition, at a really practical level.
Right.
What do you see as your major function? I know you're there to push back against the government and to question and criticize, but it isn't obvious how you go about preparing for that, or how you decide what issues you're going to focus on, and how you distribute the responsibilities
I guess
among
that is a good question.
your caucus and your broader team.
So, there's a lot of discretion. You make up your mind when you wake up in the morning. You read the news. You see, I have a team that gives me a full briefing of all the published news from the mainstream media, all the news from the independent and ethnic media, all a download of the entire.
I won't say his name, but they have one staffer who works for one very effective Conservative MP, who is, from what I have been told, just an absolute, operator is one of the words that this be. He's like probably single. He finds so much good ammunition, so he's probably in a lot of those meetings.
Social media landscape, and then I respond to that by saying, well, I think these are we have roughly 25 questions we can ask, and I'll say, well,
Actually, I think that's probably it. I'm not gonna name them, but that's all stuff I've reported on our I think it was our top staffers on the Hill, our 25 terrific staffers last year.
I want 10 on inflation, and 3 on violent crime, and 4 on whatever the subject happens to be in the day. And I want this committee to focus on this today, and that committee to focus on that today. And then our teams go out and we do it. And I've been very blessed because my caucus is extremely talented and they don't need a lot of direction. But we've been acting in unison, and I think that's why our message is pumping out so clearly to people. It's not a cacophony of sound, it's a clear drumbeat. And that's why people are hearing and appreciating
Not
the
wrong.
message.
So you feel that your party is well organized at the moment?
Extremely well organized.
Okay, so what's your evidence for that?
Well,
Like,
we've by every measure,
Yeah.
by every
I
statistic.
mean, even I'm like, what do you would like pick a just what he just said, the single drum beat.
Measure.
Hit like the if we're gonna use the drum beat analogy, his don't yell at me, conservatives. I'm just using this as a colorful analogy. That drum beat is like the drum beat from the Chinese Olympic opening ceremony where they had like 1,000 drummers going at once. And you're like, how are they so coordinated? It's amazing.
We're stronger than any political party has been in, well, maybe in my lifetime, objectively speaking. Memberships, fundraising,
Polling.
poll numbers.
right, so people are positive in consequence of that. So it's a lot easier to lead an organization when it's successful.
That's right.
Obviously, people are much more enthusiastic.
Yes.
Why do you think you're in that position?
That's a good
What's
point,
going
too.
on that's setting the stage for that? And I don't just
As
mean the failures
Trump
on
said,
on the Trudeau
success
side. I
will
mean,
bring us together.
what do you think you guys are doing right?
Well, we have a clearer mission statement, and people know exactly why we're in this. Whenever someone asks me if they say, I'm thinking of running for parliament or for mayor or some other political position, what's your advice? Well, I said, well, before I get to the advice, I have a very simple question. Why do you want this job?
Mm-hmm.
And it might seem like a simplistic question, but it's actually the most important question in life. Why? Why are you doing what you're doing? And our answer to that is to bring back the Canadian promise that anyone who works hard gets a great paycheck and a pension that buys them good food and a nice home and a safe neighborhood, that anyone from anywhere can do anything and that people are in charge of their own lives. That's effectively what we want to deliver. So every day when I'm in Parliament.
So that's a very local vision in a sense, right? It doesn't have the grandiosity of an international utopian vision, for example.
Well, maybe
it's very down to earth.
I think people are sick and tired of grandiosity. In fact, I think there's something grand about a family that can go on a nice road trip and share stories and build lasting memories that the kids will remember when they're 85 years old.
Despite
I think that's
producing all that nasty carbon dioxide.
That's right. I think those things are grand. And I think with the problem we've had in this country and in all of the countries that have been afflicted by this horrendous utopian wokeism is that it's been focused on the grandiosity of the leadership, of the egotistical personalities on top, and not the things that are grand and great about the common people. And that is another reason why I think we're doing very well. People are saying finally there's someone who's focused on letting me take back control of my own life and create a great future for my family. So that is, to answer your question, one of the reasons why we've had such incredible success over the last 2 years.
In the beginning was the Word.
Oh.
Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories.
Oh, you were not kidding about the...
Takes them seriously. My experience with the biblical text is that they're inexhaustible sources of wisdom. If I find something in them that is an obstacle, it's because there's something in me that has yet to be transformed. I just don't get it.
The person that you do not think could ever be
Daily Wire.
Oh, let me show you. This is the person who is fulfilling the law and the prophets.
But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you as well.
I love the candles.
I don't believe in that promise. I'll just be honest at this point. That has not been part of my experience.
This parable I've been trying to understand forever. While we were talking and while we were sitting there, then it hit me. I saw it.
Name me one ideology that has supplanted.
Although, one of my I like really getting really analytical about biblical stuff. I took a bunch of because I did sort of a literature course, and the further you get back in the like at least the Western canon, quote unquote, the more you're just basically reading. I don't want to say Bible fan fiction, but it's the biblical influence gets heavier and heavier the further you go back, and like so, studying the Bible as like a piece of literature. I was not making any comment on the religion or whatever, but just as a book, just a book, and the stories within, and analyzing that. I love doing that. So it's like, I don't know a bunch of these dudes, but I'm sure there'd be some stuff in there where I'd be like, I this would really get my like nerd brain going for like literary analysis of the Bible. It sounds like Mr. Pierre is flirting with the idea that every working person should be able to pay for food and shelter. Of course, that means a higher minimum wage. Don't hold your breath.
Christianity that has done good.
Is that Dennis Prager?
This Jew is very frightened of a post-Christian society.
He was the God-man, the model, the example of what we ought to become and what we can become.
It's okay. It's safe for you and all of your doubts and apprehensions to open up and to let these stories in.
He is the temple. He is the Torah. He is the covenant. He is prophecy fulfilled.
If you're doing this and it isn't also the love of wisdom, it's also an attempt at wisdom without love. In both ways, you're going radically wrong.
Power of love. It sounds so cliche when you say
60s, eh? I don't want to be in a Hallmark card, I tell you.
We've got our work cut out for us, gentlemen. This is one peculiar time and one peculiar.
They're gonna crack the Bible, guys. They're gonna figure it out themselves. Thousands of years of scholarly study of the Bible, and they're gonna crack this nut in what 10-part series on YouTube.
Relationship to, I would say, establishment organizations and political elites all across the West. A lot of that well earned. Why should Canadians believe that the vision that you just laid out is something that you hold personally dear and not merely what would you say, a set of carefully calculated campaign slogans?
Well, I look back at everything I've done.
That Jordan Peterson. Honestly, fantastic question. Just straight up, just asking them, how do we know you're not bullshitting us? Which is, I mean, if there's anyone who's gonna be able to ask that question and get Poilievre to answer in a non sort of defensive and kind of not like clam up and be like and like go on attack mode, but actually sort of engage with that question sort of in good faith, it's probably Jordan Peterson. As we're probably going to see happen, which is, well, maybe, but he's probably not going to get all defensive and go on the attack mode with Jordan Peterson, at least. I think a society can be judged by its TV shows like NBC, CBS shows that somehow do massive numbers. What do you think of? Yeah.
For my entire political career, to the time I was a teenager, you know, some people even dug up my old university essays, and I've been saying precisely the same thing the entire time.
Also, that is kind of true. I think it was like, what's that one economist that he was, something Fieldman or something. Oh, I don't have the book on me to look up, but yeah, there is like sources of him like in high school writing. Yeah, I mean, but like he's, if anything, like he's been consistent, and the changes he's made has been to sort of, I guess, lack of a better word, like soften more some of the Friedman. Yeah, Milton Friedman, is that it? Cameron Ryan with the save. How's it going, Cam? But yeah, I think it was Milton, like he was reading Milton Friedman in like high school and stuff. So like,
you know, when I was 20, I wrote an essay as Prime Minister, I would, and the title was Building Canada on Freedom. And the entire piece was about making the government small and maximizing personal freedom. So that's basically what I'm doing now.
So you have consistency.
Well, there were
going
things
for you.
when I launched my leadership race. I literally had same language in my leadership
like I can't claim to be an expert on Milton Friedman. I haven't read a lot of his stuff, or probably any. But the people who have, like when they heard that tidbit, like have told me that like that checks out. Like there's a lot. Once you hear that, it's like a almost like a like not that he. It's just like that's all it is. But there's stuff in there where it's like, oh, okay, that's you can sort of etymology a lot of his thoughts back to like being exposed to that sort of stuff early on. But don't wait. Let me double check that. It is auto. Okay, it is autofilling. From his Wikipedia. Poilievre attended an Alberta Tory Riding Association meeting as a new hobby. As a result, he became interested in politics and started reading political books, including Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, a book that greatly influenced his politics.
Launch speech that I had put in that essay 22 or 23 years earlier. And when I was part of the Harper government, we basically fought for and did the same things then that I'm proposing to do now. So as much as you can be assured of anything any political leader says, I've got evidence to back it up.
Okay, so one of the things that's been very distressing to observe, I would say, and I'm going to use the UK as an example. I mean, the UK had 14 straight years of conservative government.
Yeah.
And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, thank God for that, because it could have been Labour. But having said that, they fell 100% prey to the blandishments of the net zero types and brought forward really a catastrophic energy policy. And the UK is suffering dreadfully for that. And their immigration policy, I mean,
oh, there's one. There's one of the autofill quotes. An entity's greatest responsibility lies in the satisfaction of the shareholders.
Keir Starmer,
who are the shareholders in Canada?
For it, which was something remarkable to behold, and so did Kemi Badenoch, who now
all
runs the Conservatives
citizens?
in the UK. Now, the reason I'm bringing them up as an example is because, well, they were a Conservative government, and they certainly didn't govern by anything.
Oh shit, Fragiskatos. Peter Fragiskatos, London North Centre MP, parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Housing, is now calling on Trudeau to resign.
Approximating conservative principles. And so how do you
shortly after
how do you feel about the
Minister for Housing
if the
announced he wouldn't be running again, he would be resigning?
They'll be enticed into this global utopian delusion that seems to have enveloped so many.
Yeah, that's one
leaders,
stock is
kind of regardless
3
of
cans of maple syrup.
What do you think,
one
if
Canada
anything,
stock.
can inoculate you or has inoculated you against that?
I know better.
Well, elaborate. What?
Well,
wait,
I'm not going to do.
Let me hear that question again.
The entire probability. How do you? They didn't govern by Kemi of the net zero types. Bring Conservatives in the UK. Now, the reason I'm bringing them up as an example is because, well, they were a Conservative government, and they certainly didn't govern by anything approximating Conservative principles. And so, how do you? How do you feel about the probability that if the Conservatives in Canada take power, that they'll be enticed into this global utopian delusion that seems to have enveloped so many leaders, kind of regardless of their political stripe? What do you think, if anything, can inoculate you or has inoculated you against that?
How do we know you won't become a globalist?
Well, elaborate. What do you mean?
Elaborate.
I'm not going to do that. And it will be hard because the temptation will be, this is the mistake that conservatives.
I mean, you could argue like a shareholder in Canada is anyone who pays taxes.
I don't even know who you are.
That. Who just followed? What did that say? I don't even see it. Iron Bangle, thank you for the follow.
Conservative parties around the world have made countless times. They think Well, anybody who's got a conservative mindset is
Yeah,
already voting
probably.
for me, so I
I
can
feel like
go
there's a
off and
bunch of
chase,
those, especially because
the
we've heard a lot
ideas
of people
my,
calling for him to
political
resign
opponents, and
with their
then everyone
chests
will love me, because
post
I'll have the
cabinet
conservatives
shuffle.
due to the fact that I have the name conservative, and then I'll have all these other people because I've embraced their contrary direction. And in the short term, it works because you manage to have all of these people under, and all of the different political
anyone with savings bond, yeah.
ideologies captured
Possibly.
in one tent. But the problem happens when the policies are a disaster. And then people wake up and go, oh my God, my taxes are now up. The inflation is out of control. The deficit is spiraling. There's crime on the streets.
Very low.
So
I don't think that happens. It would take some insane
to try and
fumble.
take on the political policies of the socialists in the short term. Sure, but it's one that I will fiercely resist, because I know that by the 4th year of my mandate, people would be enraged because their lives would be even worse. So it will be tough, though. Like, it's going to be a trade-off.
See the temptation. I mean, I think many.
Hey, Iron Bangle, thank you. Thanks for well, at least I know that the tweets on Blue Sky are being seen by people.
Fall prey to the temptation to shine on the international stage, right? I mean, I can't remember who it was in the UK. I believe it was the previous Labour Party leader who said that decisions in Westminster were essentially irrelevant because all the important things were happening internationally, right? And so if people are involved in status climbing and they hit the national pinnacle, there's always, then there's the international world to, what would you say, to dominate or
by the dip.
to impress.
By the dip of Hawk to us, Rogan. That's a great,
the power of that
great
temptation,
idea.
or even of that peer pressure,
That'll
can't
definitely
be underestimated.
work.
So, okay, so now you've been, these events, these 600 events that you've gone to, so let's say that's something approximating 1,000 to 1,200 since we last talked. You spent a lot of time speaking to, and I presume listening to, ordinary Canadians. I heard you made a speech in the make a speech in the House of Commons that went viral in the last couple of weeks, and you spoke very persuasively on behalf of working class Canadians. And so tell us what you've learned, what you've heard over the last couple of years, and how that.
Yeah, that's a good point, RSJ. We'll see. Well, that's one of for the longest, up until the Freeland's resignation, I thought that's why, one of the reasons why this government would go till at least October, because it was so I even heard from other the other G6 diplomat, they were very concerned about how this election was going to play out and how that would affect the G7 thing, because it's there were 3 scenarios. 2 of them were pretty bad. The one scenario would be and this was all in the fall. So the worst case scenario would be if we had the election during the actual G7 meeting in the summer. The second worst case scenario is if we wrapped up the election right before, or called the election right before, so that there wouldn't be enough time for all of these bilateral statements and all these things that have to be accomplished before the meeting to be amended or changed in a way that would now reflect the conservative government, and they'd have to have Poilievre be the president of the G7, sort of making statements that he doesn't really believe in, and that would be really complicated. So the sort of their best case scenario would be just get the presidency over with and then have your election. Or that's not really how it was stated, but that's what they were hoping for. They were hoping that it would last long enough that they could get that all done and it wouldn't sort of mess it all up. But that's looking a lot less likely now. But we'll see. You never know. Because I keep now hearing people say that the rumor is he resigns on Monday. And it's this just feels like we've been here before. I'll believe it when I see it. Yeah, but that means this government has to make it to June, July-ish, I think, and that's almost not worth thinking about what the next couple of months would look like to get there.
Changed you, let's say, as you've moved from, well,
Just
as
taking
you-
it day by day
as
at this point.
Shifted your position up the political hierarchy and are poised really likely.
Like at this point, I don't know how they get past the budget whenever that happens, but like it's like the one thing is like the ultimate calculation now is whether the NDP believes it would be worse to continue with this government than to help call an election.
To take the reins in Canada at some.
So I think that's, I mean, that this is my guess, is that I feel like if you pay attention to where the NDP are in the polls, that might be one of your indications. There's a big full caucus meeting on Wednesday, and I think they're doing like regional caucus meetings Monday, Tuesday. They still, and there's also still like, there's like, they want like all of the pharmacare agreements haven't been made. Health Minister Mark Holland, when he announced the first agreement, I forget which province it was, but he said he had planned and hoped to get pharmacare agreements signed with all of the provinces by April 1st. So that's another sort of thing that was on the back of my head whenever people were saying like, oh, it's going to happen now. I'm like, well, do the NDP want to bring down this government and not get those healthcare agreements signed? So that's another thing. I don't know if there's still more rollout or expansion to be had on dental care. I think everything that they wanted with the anti-replacement worker legislation is now complete. So I think if there's any sort of like, and maybe they'd want to wait and allow more provinces to sign on to this national school food program. Maybe, I don't know. I think it might take a lot more than the mandated donation limits would allow to secure that RSJ. Ride a sick wave in Tofina, cruise up to the beach on a surfboard until, Trudeau resigns like that. Oh, what's that? God, I have such a good funny joke. Give me a short one. I don't want to. Oh yeah, this is how Trudeau is gonna resign at Tofino.
I knew I could count on you. I've been to every city in Mexico. Came across an unclaimed piece of meat in Baja.
Trudeau just surfs into a giant wave. Never seen it from again.
Found a passport of yours in Sumatra.
As he reaches enlightenment.
Point in the next year. You've listened to all these people, and so what have you learned? And what has it made you convinced of, let's say?
Well,
that
first
joke
of all,
is a lot funnier in my head.
There's the bad news and the good news. The bad news is that people feel like they've done absolutely everything right.
Yeah.
And
he just canoes off into the sunset.
Trapped. Young people say, look, okay, I went through, I got an education, I work nonstop, and I have made the calculation that there is no mathematical path for me to own a house.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not possible. In Toronto here, for example, if you take the average income and the average house price, it would take you 29 years to save up for a down payment. So, if you're
for a down payment,
not to pay it off, forget paying it off. And so if you're a young woman who's got a biological clock, obviously, well, do the math. You know, you start off at, let's say you're 25. Well, you're going to be in your 50s before you can afford the average house. So how are you ever going to have kids?
And that's about the time when people think about downsizing from their house.
That's what they used to think about downsizing. And, you know, they usually had their house paid off back.
Yeah, we need a ruling from Dye Men's Workwear about the what's going on with Poilievre's collar right now.
By the time they were
Someone
in their
get 'em
early
on the
50s.
horn.
So just to show how dreadfully things have worsened. That's the picture of the youth. Then there's the kind of middle-aged people who do have kids already, and they're terrified of the dangers in the streets. I mean, our streets are just being overtaken by drugs and gangsterism and other dangers, and they want safety again. And then you have business owners that are saying there's just no way to continue to compete in Canada. We have to look at moving, and that means the next 200 jobs we create is going to be in Ohio or Florida or some other place than Canada. That's the kind of overview that I get. The good news, though, is that people do now have some hope. They think that things can be turned around, and they have.
I feel like the smell lady would Allie Lukes would Dr. Allie Lukes would she would yell at you for assuming he smells like talcum powder. It's like for being ageist or something.
Correctly diagnosed the problem, which is entirely political. There is no physical, geographic reason why Canada should struggle to supply people with great opportunities of home ownership and family formation. In fact, we should be the richest country in the world.
She is.
And
she's. I said this
increasingly
before.
know
No one has had a better like redemption arc than Dr. Allie Lukes than the 30 to 50 feral hogs guy, because it's like they're just every day. It seems like there's a story that confirms that they're in fact were correct.
And they know that if we make the right, albeit difficult, political decisions, that they will once again be able to do as their parents did, which is to say, get a house, start a family, live in a safe neighborhood, raise their kids with good traditional values. That's another thing I'm finding, is that a lot of people are really getting back to those values that we were told were unfashionable. They want, young people today, they want to have families.
Well, there's been a real conservative swing, especially among young men. Well, no wonder, because they've been demonized for 30 straight years for every aspect of their masculinity, from their play preferences to their proclivity to destroy the planet with their
now he's
ambition.
getting warmed up.
And so there's definitely
we're in Peterson's wheelhouse
there,
now.
And clearly your political party and you are capitalizing on that you have the support from young people increasingly right across Canada.
We are winning among youth. In fact, the youth were the first to come on board with me. My rallies were overwhelmingly populated with youth, which is not normal for conservatives.
Right. You fellow
youth. The
youths.
reason is because in your youth, of course, you as you write it, young people want to have the adventure of their lives. They want to go into the wilderness and earn a living and bring it home and
do
raise kids and have a purpose that's bigger than just short-termism. And I think, 20 years ago, the socialists would go to university campuses and say, vote for us and we'll let you be a kid forever. We'll give you free stuff and you'll never have to get a job. And that was very temporarily popular across the Western world.
Poilievre's been playing The Forest
young people woke
on
up and found out
PS5
this was
recently.
not a utopia, it was
Or
a
I don't even
total
know if that's on
dystopia.
PS5. He's
And
playing
that
on
all the
PC.
things that they really valued and wanted.
That's what I want to know. Poilievre, what does your gaming PC looks like? And which faction do you play on in, I want to say, Age of Empires? But what's the other one? It's not Age of Empires, but it's the one where you're like you can play as like a medieval lord, and you like get to do all that sort of stuff. Like not Banner Lords. If Poilievre came out as a a OG Xbox Halo guy, he'd probably win it like with 60% of the vote. At least in young men. Aged 25 to 35. Not Total War. Crusader Kings? Is that the one I'm thinking of? But Poilievre definitely strikes me as a fellow map games guy if he plays games, if anything.
Lives were impossible when they were being borne down upon by this massive state. They've learned that help is the
Is
sun's side
HOI
of
Hearts of
control.
Iron? Yeah, that one probably. Yeah, those. Yeah,
And
the
so
real-time
now
strategy
young people
map
are-
games.
and I love this. This is great news. Our young people are saying, "I want to start a business. I want to invent something. I want to create things. I want to become a tradesman." And then when I
wanna
get
start a
good,
family.
when I get good enough at that, I want to hire 5 other tradesmen. And by the time I retire, I want to have 300 employees. And then I want to give that company to my kids. These are the stories that I hear when I go out and about in Canada. And the great news is we can have all those things. That's the optimistic message that I have for people. But we've got a limitless supply of resources here. We're like a cornucopia. You know, the third biggest supply of oil, fifth biggest supply of natural gas, biggest supply of uranium, fifth biggest supply of lithium. We've got not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 coasts to tidewater.
Right.
We live next to.
Everyone was nitpicking that, but he is technically correct. The Great Lakes count as a coast because they do connect to tidewaters. There are technically 4 coasts in Canada. I have to pedantically defend. If it has the connect the Great Lake coasts count as a coast because they connect to tidewater, technically.
The biggest military and economic superpower the world has ever seen. We have a highly educated population and the best system of.
He didn't say ocean coast. He just said because a landlocked nation can have a coast if that coast connects to tidewater. It's a coast if it has tides. I'm not.
System of government in the history of the world, the parliamentary system. Not the best government, but the best system of government. So all these massive advantages, we just need to unleash that potential.
Right. So the unhappiness that you're seeing among young people seems to me to be a consequence of the mismatch between the opportunity they see right in front of them and their frustration at the fact that opportunity can't be
technically that's
on,
correct.
Even if they're contributing their
He is correct. The best kind, technically
and they're
correct. The best kind of
doing
correct.
their part. Like they really are. You know, it's always been a habit of older
Yep.
people to say, you know, oh, the youth these days. When I look at the young people today, all they do is.
But also for the purposes of his point, he was talking about coasts to get resources into for international trade, and therefore. Sorry, I can't help myself.
It's work. I am astonished when I meet young university students how much they work outside of their studies just to scrape by. How many hours of labor they do as waitresses or in another service job so that they can pay their bills. Way more than when I was a student, 25
when I
years
was
ago.
a kid in Alberta, I could work in the summer, and I didn't work on the rig, so I didn't have one of the high-paying jobs.
Right.
I had a more, what would you say, a job that was secondarily associated with the resource economy. I could make enough money in the summer in 2 months, 4 months, to pay for the tuition and my entire year's rent.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
It's an
now
international
these kids
trade
are
corridor
working
soon.
20, 30 hours a week in addition to a full course.
Hell yeah. The fifth coast is PP coasting into the PM chair. That's a good one. I like that one.
and they look exhausted. When I meet young people today, they are exhausted. They have bags under their eyes, and all they do is work. And the worst part about it is not that they're working all the time; it's that they don't see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Are you tired of feeling sluggish, run down, or just not your best self? Take control of your health and vitality
Wild
today with Balance of Nature.
cut
With
in
Balance
for
of
the
Nature,
ad.
There's never been a more convenient dietary supplement.
Right, like right in the middle of him
fruits
making
and
a
vegetables every day.
fairly
Balance of Nature
good
takes
cogent
fruits and
point.
vegetables, they freeze dry them, turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. The capsules are completely void of additives,
I mean, I currently have
extracts,
bags under my eyes.
pesticides,
We
or
can quibble
additives.
over whether I still
The only
count as a
thing is
young
Balance of
person,
Nature
but
fruit
shut
and
up.
veggie capsules are fruits and veggies. Right now, you can order with promo code Jordan to get 35% off your first order, plus get a free bottle of fiber and spice. Experience Balance of Nature for yourself today. Go to balanceofnature.com and use promo code Jordan for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer, plus get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Jordan for 35% off your first preferred order, plus a free bottle of
Jesus,
fiber
this is
and
a
spice.
long ad.
Well, that's a genuine breakdown of the social contract, right? Because the deal,
Absolutely.
like you said, the deal was supposed to be, if you do things right, you'll be rewarded.
Yes.
Right. And that's the intergenerational compact, essentially. And there isn't anything that defines hopelessness more clearly than seeing that if you do all the right things, the pathway is paved to failure.
Right.
Right. So that's so demoralizing. And, you know, what's even worse about that is that the people who are most demoralized by that are precisely the people who would be most productive and hardworking. Because the ones that are sponging along, they don't give a damn anyways, right? They're not losing any glorious future, and they're not sacrificing for it anyways.
Yeah,
but
no, I'm
it's really not good when your
turning
economy is set up to
33 in
punish people
next
who are
November. I
entrepreneurial
just
and
turned
hardworking.
32.
And
Don't
that's
feel
what
it
it
yet.
does right
Okay,
now.
so
kind of feeling
let's
it,
delve
but
into that a little bit. So I've been tracking economic statistics in relationship to Canada and sort of left me open-mouthed in amazement at our dismal condition. So from what I've been able to understand, the richest people per capita in terms of GDP per person, gross domestic product per person, so that's total productivity, is Ontario.
incorrect. It's Alberta, then Saskatchewan, then technically Newfoundland and Labrador. But I mean, no offense to Newfoundland and Labrador, but I feel like with the per capita thing, it makes it slightly better. But so give it to Newfoundland and Labrador either way. So if you we'll let them say this, but Max Fawcett pulled up a good fact check of this.
And Ontario inhabitants are now poorer per capita than inhabitants of Mississippi, and that's the poorest American state. So the inhabitants of Canada's richest province are poorer than the inhabitants of the United States' poorest state, and that's
incorrect. So I think this is from 2023. I mean, unless it's changed drastically in the past 2 years. So, oh God, this is not going to suffice. Where is it? So GDP per capita in 2022 in thousands of USD, purchasing power adjacent. So it's using calculations using data from Statistics Canada, RBC June 2023 forecast, and USBEA, all values in real PVP adjusted USD using OECD PVPs. I don't know what that means, but I'm assuming someone else does. So in 14th, province with the highest GDP per capita in 2022 was Alberta, making it 14th when compared to when you rank U.S. states and provinces. Just behind New Jersey and ahead of Texas. Then the next one is Saskatchewan in 25th, behind Pennsylvania, ahead of Oregon. Next is Newfoundland and Labrador, behind Arizona, ahead of Michigan. BC comes in next at 48th, behind Kentucky, ahead of Idaho, and then Ontario in 51st, behind South Carolina, but ahead of Alabama. And then 55th is Quebec, then Manitoba, then Mississippi, then New Brunswick, PEI, and Nova Scotia. Yeah. And Mississippi is still down there. It's, I guess, just below $50,000. And Ontario is past it by a bit. But it's 51st, and Mississippi is 57th. Which is not great, but it's still, Alberta is 14th. Just for a quick factaroony data check.
It's actually occurred primarily in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And that was data. So even just from that framing in the past 10 years, that's from 2022. So not correct. Maybe in the past 2 years, it's changed drastically.
We're basically at parity before that.
Yes.
And had historically.
Yeah, it's like just because we're comparable in size and we're really close doesn't mean that comparing Canada to the US is actually a very helpful metric.
Not quite as rich as the Americans, with some, blips above them, but pretty much tracking them one to one.
Yeah.
And now it's 60%, something like that. And that's not all the bad news, because it's 60% in terms of absolute wealth, and a real estate market that's twice as expensive approximately on average.
Yeah.
Right. So now
it's really bad. It's really incredible. Like 10 years ago, the New York Times wrote an article, Welcome to Canada, we're home of the world's most affluent middle class. And in that article, the Times had calculated that median American and Canadian incomes were tied, and that Canadians were slightly better off. Now, part of that was because of the 08-09 financial crisis hit them harder than it hit us. But still, now per capita GDP in the States is $22,000 higher than in Canada.
And then oil prices crashed in 2014. And who is number one in that little list? Alberta? Do you think maybe that affected it a little bit?
Measured in USD. So that's about almost 30,000 measured in.
Right. So that's a whole other income, essentially.
Yes.
That's a whole other part-time income.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, as you correctly point out, their real estate is significantly cheaper than ours. So their dollars go a lot further, even when you match up the exchange rates. And what's worse than that is that the leading indicators are even more horrific. And leading indicators, for example, are investment dollars.
Oh yeah, no, I would
your wealth
love to
is
have a
determined
QP
by
on
your
Wednesday.
investment today. So if your employer, for example, is buying lots of new tools and technology, you're going to be able to crank out more widgets. So you crank out those widgets, then you can ultimately make more income down the road. If you take business investment and divide it by the number of workers, the American worker gets $28,000 of investment measured in US dollars.
A widget is a small gadget or mechanical device. Okay.
This is per capita?
Per worker.
Or per year?
Per worker, per member of the labor force.
Okay.
So you take the total business investment of the United States divided by the total number of workers in America, it's 28 grand. In Canada, it's 15 grand. So the Canadian worker gets about 55 cents for every dollar of his American, and they're both measured in USD.
But
so
the worker doesn't get that investment. Doesn't get I don't even think it would be a probably a much smaller fraction of that. Real housing prices. What does it mean seasonally adjusted? Maybe surprising, but real house prices have grown more in the U.S. than Canada under the Liberal government. Not accounting for the risk that business owners take. But what is the discrepancy between the two graphs? Where is Max Fawcett getting his numbers from? From The Dallas Federal Reserve. What's Fred? Oh, it's just based on, oh, this is the change since, okay. That would be like, because if he does, and it's like, I'm still, like, I will believe it when I see it. I almost reverted completely back to, until it isn't so, I'm just going to assume it will happen in October and be prepared for that not to happen anytime between that. But yeah. But that would be like to get shuffled out of cabinet within like a month without even being like bare. I don't even have they like. Well, I guess they're definitely not gonna. That's another thing I'm gonna have to chase up a tree. Is like, are you gonna do new mandate letters? And they're just gonna be like, no, it's the exact same mandate letters as 2021. So that'll be fun. But yeah, that'll like just to get shuffled out of cabinet before even the House returns.
How is the
you don't even get to,
that's investment in future productivity?
That's investment in
in
machines and technology, warehouses.
I think 2016
factories,
taught us predictions are worthless, and every year since is only not
businesses
worthless,
make.
but just kind of like, unless you are a paid pollster and it's your job to poll and make predictions based off those numbers, what are you even doing? Why even put a marker down? You've got nothing to gain, only stuff to lose, even if slightly.
Divided by the number of workers, that's the measurement. So now that means they're getting better technology, better
it's just all vibes,
new machines, better tools than our workers, and they will be able to crank out even greater wages for their people than we will unless we catch up with that. Our productivity is another major problem. Right now, and that's productivity sounds complicated.
Bruce
it's actually
saying?
Extremely simple. You just take the GDP and you divide it by the hours
You want
worked in the country.
McGinty to get booted,
American
RSJ?
GDP
He'd probably not run
$80.
again. Then in 4 years can run in the nomination. Probably won't win, but with a few beers me, I'll have the courage to file the paperwork. Like, to run against him? Also, I looked that up. Average salary in Canada compared to the U.S. So average salary in the U.S. is medium income in the United States is $70,784. Median income in Canada is 68,400 Canadian, which in USD is 50,348. So it is higher in the US. Household income in 2023 for the US was 80,610, while in Canada, and this is for 2022, I guess that's all they have, the average household income was 70,500, which is 50,656. That's what Google's given me. There will be a new record for shortest PM tenure such this a good. Oh, yeah, yes, no, I thought of that. Yeah, no, because that's the thing I was quibbling with Jordan Peterson, because he's like, most likely the next prime minister. I'm like, well, the Liberals might sneak in one more Liberal prime minister before the election.
An American worker works on average, he or she produces $80 of GDP.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, it's 50. So that's every hour. So that means we have to work 60% more just to make the same amount and have the same level of income to buy food and housing. So that's the Now, that sounds like a bunch of wonk speak that might seem like it only matters to someone staring at a spreadsheet or a graph or a chart. But in fact, that's reflected in the fact that our 2 million people are lined up at food banks because they can't afford food, and 80% of youth can't afford homes. And our quality of life and the things we can afford to provide our kids have fallen back so much.
Well,
There's
it's a
real
pretty
life.
stark and easily comprehensible statistic.
Yeah.
I mean, if you work and you produce $80 worth of goods and services in an hour, compared to working and producing 50, obviously that's a substantial shortfall.
Yeah.
So, and is there a starker indicator of the economic disparity between the US and Canada than that? Or do you think that's the primary statistic?
I mean, I think housing costs are another one.
Right,
I mean,
right.
There was a study out just 10
Are they
days
useful
ago that
nerds?
has Toronto and
Is that the
Vancouver
opposite of a
now
useful
by
idiot?
far the most unaffordable housing markets in North America. And so, you know, housing costs are...
Oh, which is the insult? Slippery otters, greasy walruses, wet seals, none of the above. This is my only response to the greasy walruses discourse.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
I don't even know what that...
50%
Neither of them even
higher
have
in Toronto than
mustaches.
they
I
are in
don't get it.
Chicago, even though Chicago workers make 50% more money.
Which states are the biggest trading part? I don't know what the top two are, but I would assume probably like Alberta and then Ontario and then Quebec, maybe third, possibly Saskatchewan in there. I feel like, well, I mean, that clip's definitely held up. I haven't watched Blades of Glory in a while, but I feel like it holds up.
The same is true between Vancouver and Seattle. Seattle workers make way more than Vancouver workers, but housing is 60 or 70% more expensive in Vancouver. So on all the measures,
less by a lot.
Yes.
By a lot.
By a lot.
Yeah.
And
like
we're paying more.
Paying more by a lot.
Yeah.
Right, and most of that's transpired in the last 10 years.
Yes, and we're paying the difference by accumulating enormous quantities of debt. Our households are by far the most indebted in the G7. When you divide total household debt by GDP, we now have a bigger stock of household debt than our entire economy. We are more indebted as households than the Americans were right before the 2008 financial crisis. And so what we have as a model in Canada is we have artificial...
Jordan Peterson taking the Lord's name in vain. I can't believe you.
Scarcity imposed by a very heavy and restrictive state, confiscatory state. So that suppresses production.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to allow for consumption, we print money and borrow money and then flood the economy with that money.
Okay, so that's another problem. So that's the inflationary problem.
Yes.
Now, the problem with inflation, there's many problems with inflation, but one of them is that it particularly punishes people who are thrifty and who save.
Yes.
Right, right. So inflation punishes the people who forego gratification to invest in the future.
That's right.
Right, so that's a very bad idea.
It's a horrible... Inflation is the single most immoral tax for so many reasons. One, it takes from savers and people who are trying to be responsible, thus making it impossible to be responsible. Right. Because you will, if you refuse to play the inflation game of borrowing money to buy things you can't afford, someone else inevitably will, and you won't be able to afford anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you ultimately have to act responsibly. It's like Milton Friedman was asked, what would you do with your money in times of inflation? He said, spend it.
Right, right.
Like the first thing you want to do when inflation is out of control is to make sure you get rid of this thing that's losing its value. The second reason it's immoral is it takes from the poor, because the poorest people they do not have the ability to buy inflation-proof assets like gold and real estate and fancy watches and art collections and fancy wines and things that go up with or even exceed inflation. So it's a very big wealth transfer from the poor and the working class to the very, very wealthy. A very small group of people actually get richer.
So the socialist policies that provide goods and services to Canadians, let's say, or denizens of other countries by printing money actually punish the poor brutally.
Oh, absolutely.
In consequence of the inflation that they generate.
Yes, I mean, all the socialist policies in practice redistribute from the working class to the super wealthy in practice. And I can prove that on again and again and again.
In theory.
In practice.
Yeah.
In practice, all the redistribution that happens in these so-called socialist countries ultimately goes from the working class to the super wealthy. That is the reality. But just one last thing on inflation. The final reason why it's so immoral is nobody votes on it. The basic principle of our parliamentary system is the government can't tax.
Is Poilievre promising not that there won't be inflation under his government? I feel like obviously he's not explicitly promising that, but that seems to be like the implication here. If it's so immoral, then he's not going to impose inflation on Canadians. It's an immoral tax.
What Parliament has not voted, the people must, no taxation without representation, right? But no one ever votes to have the money printing happen.
No, it means that.
So the inflation is adopted secretly, and you blame the grocer because groceries are more expensive, or your local gas station because gas is more, or your realtor because when in fact it was actually the government that bid up all of those things with money printing, and you didn't even know about it. So it is silent. It's a silent thief that takes from the poor and gives to the richest people.
Or is he saying that under his government they won't print any new money?
People.
At least any more than the like sort of, I think there's like a rate they print automatically to like a replacement rate sort of, so they can get the old stuff out of circulation. But I mean, it's like what is the like nobody likes inflation. It's bad. Like we don't like, but like what's the solution here?
And it destroys the working class. And that's why I want to crush inflation. We need a policy that seeks to stop inflation at all costs.
Okay, so what would you do to stop inflation?
Well, we stop the money printing. You know, we need.
But in what? So completely?
And the money printing is just a means to fund deficit spending. Governments borrow to
define the deficit, for people.
So basically the deficit is the difference between what the government spends and what it brings in.
It's usually calculated on a yearly basis.
That's
deficit.
right.
Yeah. And the debt?
Well, the debt is just the accumulation of the deficits.
Right.
So the deficit right now is $62 billion. And
I thought it had a ceiling of
41 billion, right.
Wasn't that a ceiling?
Yeah.
Guess not, eh?
It was a guardrail.
No,
it was a guardrail. Poilievre should know that. He made a lot of analogies and jokes about them smashing through the guardrail.
And look, there are very real present-day consequences for that. Deficits increase the money supply. Central banks effectively facilitate that increase in the money supply, and that causes inflation. And it's why I have a buddy whose family moved here from Italy back in 1973. His father worked paving roads, and his mother made sandwiches in a senior's home. They were able to pay off their home 10 minutes from Parliament Hill in 7 years.
Right.
Their grandchildren wouldn't be able to save up a down payment for that home in 15 years, and they will be university educated with all the advantages of having been here 2 decades. That is the consequence of the money supply growing vastly quicker than the stuff that money buys. So what we have to do is stop growing the money supply and start growing the stuff money buys, right? Produce more energy, grow more food, build more homes. We have to unleash the free enterprise system to produce more stuff of value. And this is where we have to remove the artificial scarcity that the government is imposing on the population. Let's incentivize our municipalities to grant the fastest.
So you're going to get rid of supply
in the world to build homes.
Oh God, I keep wanting to say supply and confidence.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to say to the municipal governments, they
management.
Either speed up permits, cut development charges, and free up land, or they will lose their federal infrastructure money. So they will have a powerful carrot and stick incentive to speed up home building.
And the percentage of a new house price that's a consequence of government taxation and regulation?
Well, in Vancouver, it's 60%.
60%. Now, does that include the land and the house?
Yes, that includes everything. So I'll tell you how they calculate it. CD Howe took the cost of compared the cost of building a home to the cost of buying a home.
Yeah.
And he said, what's the gap between those two things? So they added up land, labor, profit for the developer, materials, and they compared that to the sale price. And they found the gap was $1.2 million. So that's $1.2 million of extra cost above and beyond the materials, the labor, the land, and the profit for the developer. So where's that going? Well, the answer is development charges, sales taxes, land transfer taxes,
Right.
the delays in getting the permit, time is money, the consultants, lawyers, accountants, lobbyists that the developer has to hire in order to get the approval. So in other words, we're spending twice, in Vancouver, we spend twice as much on bureaucrats than we do on all other.
So wait, the profit for the developer is calculated before they look at what it's sold. How do you find out what the profit is before the sale price? How does that work? How do you calculate the profit for the developer before you know before you look at the sales price? How is that you need to know what it's sold for? I guess there is such a thing as excess profits, because there must be a set amount of profit that we know they're going to want to make. You can't calculate the profits within it. So, but he has to say that, because then you can't say, well, because if he says, well, this is what it costs to build the home and all the materials and the labor and blah, 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 and then the sale price is this much, but you have to say they've already calculated profit within the first number to rule it out as being one of the reasons why there's $1 million extra being tacked on the price tag. Like, how do
Other things,
unless he's maybe
combined to build a
explaining it
home.
wrong,
More
or
money
I'm
goes to
understanding it
bureaucrats
wrong.
than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who build the place. And to add insult to injury, those tradespeople who build homes can't afford to live in them.
Right.
I mean, it is so. What we need to do is slash the bureaucracy. And I'm going to say to the mayors, you're not getting federal infrastructure money until you slash your development charges, speed up your permits. I'm going to take the federal GST off new homes under a certain limit and encourage the provinces to do the same. But we've got so much land. Like, we should have the most affordable housing in the world. It should be dirt cheap because we have the most dirt. We just need to get the government.
But most of it is rocks.
Out of the way. The same goes for
and very cold rocks at that.
We're still importing oil when we've got the world's third biggest supply. Why?
Yeah, Coastal House on Great Slave Lake for $1 million
overseas.
You mean like to Germany and Japan, even when they ask?
Exactly.
And are offering multi-decade contracts at distressed prices because they're so desperate for energy, right? And we can't make a business case for that, famously.
Yes, this is the offer.
I think that was perhaps the single stupidest thing I ever heard a politician say, and that's a really hard contest to win.
As we celebrate the gift of life,
Oh.
you have an opportunity to share
There it
the
is.
gift with a mother and her baby. Imagine a young woman facing an unplanned pregnancy, feeling alone and unsure of what to do. She's searching for hope, and that's where Preborn Ministries comes in. Deanna already had 8 children and was in a tumultuous marriage. The thought of another child was more than she could bear. She tried to order the abortion pill, but by God's design, it never came. At 18 weeks along, Deanna visited a preborn network clinic. While getting her sonogram, her baby waved at her. Then she remembered that this was the baby that she had asked God for. God saved her baby that day, and he also saved her. For just $28, you can help save life. And thanks to a special matching grant, your gift is doubled. Just $28 provides 1 ultrasound, 140 sponsors 5. That That means your $140 gift becomes $280, potentially helping 10
I
mothers
thought
and
this was just like a
To support this
tag
vital work, dial
in
pound
the
250 and say the keyword baby.
like
That's pound
they
250,
had like a
keyword baby.
link
Or
in
visit
the
preborn.com/Jordan.
description.
Preborn maintains a 4-star charity rating.
It's just
and
a
all gifts
full-on
are
ad.
tax-deductible. Join us in supporting this
Talking
crucial
about
work. Visit Preborn.
a woman with 8 children in a tumultuous marriage, and by the grace of God, they helped her have her 9th.
Preborn.com/Jordan today.
All right.
Well, you look at the price of natural gas is 3 to 5 times higher in both Europe and Asia than it is in North America, which means there's a hell of a lot of profit arbitrage in getting our product over there. In the last 10 years, the Americans have added, I think, 6 liquefaction plants. The Qataris have massively increased their production. Canada has not completed a single new liquefaction facility. There's one that's supposed to come online soon in Kitimat that was approved by the Harper government. It's only now coming online. The Germans actually built an import terminal in 194 days from concept to completion. We've had direct formal requests for our natural gas from Japan, Greece, Germany, France, and I'm probably missing some others. We have the 5th biggest supply. We have cold weather, which makes it much cheaper to liquefy gas. It takes 11 days to ship to Asia from BC. It takes 20 days from the US Gulf Coast. So it's basically half the shipping time.
And you figured out a way to monetize cold weather.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very difficult thing to do.
Exactly, yeah. Which also will help with data centers. Data centers, which we're going to need data centers for AI and blockchain and countless other things that we have the energy for. It takes tremendous.
That's how he's gonna stop inflation. Canada's gonna opt out of inflation with Bitcoin.
Power these data centers. Apparently, a Chat GPT inquiry is 10 times more energy intensive than a Google inquiry. So I think it's 2.9 watt hours
Data centers have destroyed Ireland.
One Chat GPT question.
Yeah, the Irish are not happy about the data centers.
3 watt hours to process a Google search.
Right.
So in other words,
the thing about human brains is, it turns out that the remarkable thing about human brains is how smart they are for how little energy they use.
Right.
Right. Whereas we're building machines that are super intelligent, but they're very energy hungry.
Right. Well, we have a lot of artificial intelligence in government as well, but it's a different kind.
Yeah.
But
that's for sure.
but we could be powering these data centers with Canadian natural gas generators. With nuclear, we have the biggest supply of uranium. We invented the CANDU. We have the incredible nuclear physicists and engineers. 60% of Ontario's energy already comes from nuclear. So we could be powering these facilities, and they're just beasts that are going to gobble up electricity.
Yeah, the tech companies are absolutely desperate for it.
Right. I mean, Facebook, I understand they're looking at building their own nuclear plant to power.
Yeah, and Microsoft revitalized 3 Mile Island.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
and they bought all the power that it's going to generate.
We have about 250.
Zuckerberg is going to build a nuclear reactor?
We could do a hell of a lot more.
That's some James Bond villain. Like, what's
sauce is our energy, our incredible
that one?
Supply of energy of all kinds, hydro,
bad
nuclear,
news is
natural
good news,
gas.
Mr. Bond. That one, that's very
Zuckerberg
coded.
Of these resources,
He's going to become Iron Man.
Try to organize things so that energy superpower wasn't an insult.
I can't do a Zuckerberg impression, but imagining Mark Zuckerberg slamming his desk, being like, Tony Stark built one in a cave. In his whatever, he's doing I mean, he's kind of jacked now. Zuck's been working out. You can tell. All right, one second. I need to go to the little boy's room. Tell me if they say anything
National Bank
super
did
wild.
a study. If you want to talk to these environmental loons that hate our energy sector, they said the great economist Stéphane Marion out of Calgary, National Bank, said if we displaced half of the electricity demand that India will have added to its grid over the next 20 years, by supplying our natural gas instead of them using coal, it would reduce global emissions by 2.5 billion tons, which is 3 times the emissions of all of Canada. So in other words, by exporting our gas, which is half as emissions intensive as coal, we could do far more than we could even do if we shut our entire economy down and disappeared from the earth. So why don't we address the environment with energy abundance instead of energy poverty?
Well, that's obviously the moral thing to do with regards to the alleviation of absolute poverty as well.
Yeah.
Because there's an environmental case to be made for that too, which I learned about 15 years ago. If you alleviate absolute poverty, the people who are now comparatively wealthy, so say starting to move into the middle class, take a much longer term view of their lives and their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives, which are now relatively assured, and they're much more likely to take environmental action at the local level. So it looks like the fastest pathway to a genuinely green and sustainable future is through the eradication of absolute poverty.
Right.
And the most effective route to that is cheap energy.
Right.
So
absolutely.
So it looks like we could have a green future and eat our cake too, so to speak. And Canada could definitely be at the forefront of that.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so I want to turn back to some numbers. The deficit this year was 61 billion.
That was last year's deficit.
Last year. And there's 40 million people in Canada. And so that's $1,500 per person federal overspending. And that's $6,000 essentially per family. So just for everybody watching and listening, your federal government spent $6,000 of your family's money last year going over their budget. That's just what they spent in excess of what they had originally budgeted. Right.
And that's on top of having among the highest taxes in the world, with our 53% highest marginal tax rate, plus carbon tax, plus high payroll taxes, plus high business taxes, plus high capital gains taxes. So they're taking in more money than ever before. They've squeezed the taxpayer out of every last dime, and they're still $62 billion short.
Right.
And that's just one level of government, by the way. Then the provinces have deficits that compound the federal one. So we have way too much government, and we need to reduce the size and cost of government and unleash the power of the free market.
Okay, so it's also the case that we haven't gone into diagnostics yet, but it's also the case that the Trudeau administration has increased the federal bureaucracy 40%?
In bodies, yes.
In bodies since its inception.
Yeah.
Right. But despite that, they've also radically increased the amount of money that they're spending on consultants.
Yes.
Who are about as expensive. They're as expensive as employees go.
Oh, they're way more expensive.
Yeah, as any employee you could ever possibly have, right? $600 an hour, something like that. Right. So they've massively increased the size of the federal bureaucracy, but also massively increased the degree to which they outsource the work that hypothetically the bureaucrats should be doing.
And this is not, it sounds like one of those sort of annoying things that bothers us all, but isn't very substantive. You think one guy is making $600 an hour. We're spending $21 billion on federal government consultants alone. That's $1,400 per Canadian family in federal taxes
per year,
just for consultants.
Right.
Per year. That's recurring. That's not a one-time cost. So it is an insane amount of money to be spending on that, especially when you have more bureaucrats to supposedly do the work. And arguably, they're delivering worse results than ever before. I mean, our border is more porous. Our military has been weakened. And our basic services.
Weakened or devastated?
Well, you could put it either way. I mean, I think it's definitely been weakened. And despite the heroism of the men and women who still serve, the political leadership has undermined it in every possible way.
Right. Immigration, porous border. I think our per capita immigration rate.
What is this, JMT? You know I have to do it. God damn it, you're all wrong. 77%. 3,000 people. Maybe 2,000 plus and change who are all wrong.
Rate exceeds that of the U.S., even given the U.S. open southern border.
Oh, by far. We had a population growth
I have cake.
of
Look how good that is.
1.2 million
Just
in
also
2023. That's on a base of 40 million people. So it's an astonishing number of people to bring in 1 year. Everyone now
cookies and
admits
cream
that this was
fudge.
a calamity for housing,
Cookies and cream
the job
fudge,
market,
and
our healthcare
Well,
system.
Trudeau himself
I
walked it
think
back recently.
gingerbread,
With
like
what was the approximation
cheesecake,
of a public
I
apology?
think?
Yes.
Which is wild.
Right. This is after he called everyone who questioned his immigration policy a racist.
Right.
And then he adopted the policies that he was calling racist only a year and a half earlier. So.
Okay, so that's a lot of. I just talked to Terry Glavin, a Canadian journalist, this week too, and he did a five-dimensional analysis of
Sorry,
the
I had to
trouble
get that out.
Canada was in. It was blackly comic in some ways because
Isn't it
we
Glavin?
realized that
Isn't it Terry Glavin or is it Glavin? Have I been saying it wrong this whole time?
at the end of the conversation or near the end of it that we hadn't even discussed.
This is all like leftovers from Friendsgiving this morning. It's great. We made raclettes, which I've never had before. It's kind of like fondue, where like you obviously have all your cheese, and then you have like a hot stone, and you put like you have these little metal serving trays that you put the cheese in, and they're little like sort of bowl things, and you just put it on hot stone and it melts it. And you can like put bread on the hot stone and like grill up your bread and then put the cheese. Oh, so good. It's so many different types of cheeses too.
The ever-present threat of the.
And I had like a Tony Soprano level of prosciutto.
Quebec separatists, and I was thinking, oh my God, like Canada's in a pretty dismal state when the threat of Quebec separatism is number 6 on the list of threats to the integrity of the country.
Yes.
Right. So okay. So now
No,
this is.
yeah, that's making a comeback too. God.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
I know.
The PQ is now leading in the polls in Quebec after they had been completely obliterated in the Harper era. Separatism was completely dead in Quebec, and now it's making a resurgence. And ironically,
more out of desperation than anything else.
well, I mean, it's interesting that the leader of the PQ has actually been making economic arguments in favor of separate. They used to always try to avoid that because most Quebecers would say, well, clearly we'd be worse off economically if we left. But because Trudeau has been such, and Freeland and the entire Liberal gang in Ottawa has been such a colossal disaster for our national economy, the separatists are now able to make the argument that they would be better off separating from that calamity. Now, I
Maybe
intend
that was
to
the plan all along.
Maybe I intend to reverse that argument by making our economy strong again. But it really is astonishing to see how badly things have changed in every respect.
Okay, so this has really transpired in large part over the 9 to 10 year period that Trudeau has been governing.
9 long years.
So when you are trying to put your finger on what went so wrong, so calamitously wrong, what do you think the major contributors were? I mean, there's a lot of hydras whose heads we're encountering at the moment, and I imagine it's relatively difficult to trace a causal pathway, but what did we do wrong as a country?
Well, I mean, it doesn't. What I'm about to say is not a shock to anyone. We have a prime minister who is dedicated to a extremely radical
FLQ makes a comeback in 2025.
It is
Jesus,
just rehashed socialism.
Last thing we need.
Discredited again and again and again throughout the ages, and his basically authoritarian socialism has guided him throughout his entire prime ministership. He believes in a state that controls every aspect of your life, your money, your speech, your thought. Controls the economic, all of the industries of the country. Every time that has been tried, it is a complete disaster. So there's no mystery involved. It is the same old disastrous outcome that results from the same old disastrous policies.
Right, that have demonstrated themselves as disastrous continuously throughout the 20th century.
Exactly.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is particularly striking, I saw Stephen Guilbeault, who's probably the minister in Trudeau's cabinet who's most fervently
he describes himself as a
Canadian
socialist.
economy. Well, this is the thing. So he described himself as a socialist. And so for all you international people listening, Canada has always had a socialist party, and that's the New Democratic Party, the NDP, which is currently run by Jagmeet Singh, who's propping up Trudeau, all his protestations to the contrary. And Canadians have always been, about 20% of Canadians have stably supported the socialists, the NDP in Canada, and that's been true since about 1962 or something, when they first popped up as a federal party. Now, the Liberals, and that's Trudeau's party, have been a centrist party historically speaking, and they were the home of the classic Liberals, all things considered. And they like to steal good ideas from the left and from the right, and chart Canada's course down the middle. The thing about Trudeau's Liberals is they're not Liberals, is they're far left socialists. And they came to power in the guise of Liberals, and that meant...
But then what are the NDP?
Their government was fraudulent, technically speaking, from the beginning, because Guilbeault, for example, obviously should have been a member of the NDP and not the classic traditional Canadian Liberals. But he didn't care, because he knew that had he run for the socialists, he would have ended up with 20% of the vote, because that's what they always do, and never had any clear pathway to power.
Exactly.
And so Trudeau brought a bunch of people in who were so radically left that they left the NDP in the dust, essentially. And they've been running the country on false pretenses.
So the Liberals are running to the left of the NDP.
If you ally that with the fact that Trudeau is clearly... He clearly has narcissistic personality characteristics and runs the country, I think, as a testament to his own grandeur. It's something like that. And one of your caucus members recently stood up in the House and I think listed something approximating 60 scandals. I mean, I've been scandalized by that, because my observation, I've been watching the Canadian political landscape for, 5 decades, and the Trudeau government has skated through at least a half a dozen scandals that under normal circumstances would have provoked an honorable government to resign. And then that doesn't count the other 54.
Yeah.
And so at the moment, Trudeau's grip on authority is very shaky. His deputy prime minister resigned last week in a cloud of catastrophic, surreal manipulation. He shuffled his cabinet this week. At least a third of his caucus doesn't have any confidence in him, but he's being propped up by the socialists, Jagmeet Singh in particular, who also continually proclaims publicly that he is an opponent of the Trudeau government and is standing up against him, while refusing categorically to do anything, to do the thing that's actually in his power to bring down the government. So do you want to, I just can't understand this at all. So do you want to walk us through this?
Well, let's first of all shed a brief tear for Jagmeet Singh, because the problem he has is that he's trying to be an NDP leader and we already have an NDP prime minister. I mean, Justin Trudeau is, he's actually much more radical than the traditional NDP.
As the NDP themselves admit, the previous leaders of the NDP.
Yes, he attacked the NDP Trudeau attacked the NDP for being too conservative.
Yep.
But because he had the comfortable blanket of the Liberal Party, which governed for most of the last century, people didn't realize what kind of radical they were dealing with. Yeah. The second problem Jagmeet Singh has is that all of his political ideology is implemented now. So, and we're seeing it. Like, people look around and say, okay, this is what it looks like. The utopia the NDP has been spinning in the corner of Parliament. They told us everything was going to be free and wonderful and just, and there would be
racial equity.
There would be there would be unicorns and butterflies and rainbows, and this would be utopia. Well, now that all of their policy agenda, all of their agenda is implemented, and people look around and it's a hellscape. You know, we have 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario, 35 in Halifax. We have hate crimes are up 253% in the last 9 years. The military is decimated. Wages are dropping. Like it's the list goes on. And so Jagmeet Singh is trying to disown that ideology, even though that it belongs to him. And he's trying to unsuccessfully to convince people
What was his
that
question?
he's somehow different than
yes.
that, when in fact Trudeau has only been doing what Singh would have done in his place. And so it is a classic for socialists. What they try to do is
they want to
change
get the
their
stuff
names and move on and try to have everyone forget their past. And when I say that socialists changed their names,
and sort
I
of
mean,
like,
you know, they
for lack of a better term, conservative proof a lot of the stuff.
They became socialist, and then they became social democrats, and then they stole the word liberal, and then they ruined that word, so they changed their name to progressives, and then they changed their name to woke, and now they claim they don't want to be called woke anymore. Because socialists always try to disown the things they've done because it's manifestly.
If they got into fisticuffs, I mean, I think that Sergeant at Arms does have the ability to detain people, so that could happen. I don't think it's likely.
Disastrous, and that is what Singh is trying to do, while simultaneously keeping Trudeau's government going. He voted just a couple of weeks ago against a non-confidence motion that I put forward, which contained Singh's own criticisms of Trudeau in Singh's own words. So he voted against his own words to keep Trudeau in power. But I will remind people.
How do you account for that from a motivational perspective? I mean, the scuttlebutt in the Canadian press is that Singh is propping up the government for personal reasons, say, regarding his pension. Now, you're making a much more political case. But what I can't understand how he can reconcile himself to himself, because what he does is so at odds with what he says that it couldn't be more different. Like, if he allied him, the other thing I can't figure out, maybe you can shed some light on this, is like, when Singh agreed to act as Trudeau's support, why the hell didn't he negotiate a cabinet seat? I mean, why didn't he make it into a formal coalition? I know that's not a traditional Canadian move.
I mean, that is a fair question, but it would probably, because it would have been seen as like I mean, any other time a full-on coalition has been attempted, it's been, people lose their minds. So,
but it could happen. And so he sold his soul to Trudeau fundamentally.
Yes, no, but they would cut they'd cut to a different camera. They'd cut to the speaker's feed.
What he could have gained,
probably, so you wouldn't be able to see the.
That's how it looks to me. And what do you think about that?
The actual fight, probably.
I mean, he's
if
not a very
there
good
was one,
negotiator,
hypothetically.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing is all of these egomaniacs in both the NDP and what we now call the Liberal Party are turning on each other because they all want to disown their collective record. All of them want to say, "Oh, I wasn't part of this," and whether it's the outgoing finance minister Freeland or Mark Carney, who's been writing the financial plan behind the scenes, or Jagmeet Singh. They're all trying to say, I wasn't there, I wasn't part of it, I'm something completely different than what you see. And that is just an illustration of how much of a disaster their agenda has been. And I think that's why we're doing so well, and we're going to defeat them, and Canadians will give.
I don't think we're fighting. I'm just explaining what would hypothetically
opposite
happen.
Direction.
Okay, so what do you see on the horizon in the upcoming year? I want to talk about two things. What you think is going to unfold? Well, even in January, I mean, once Parliament reconvenes, and what you expect from Trudeau in terms of his political action, then what you expect as the Liberal Party tries to reformulate itself. Like, I can't imagine a scenario, not really, where Trudeau leads Liberals into the next election. That seems to me highly improbable. It wouldn't surprise me if he has to be removed kicking and screaming, so to speak. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on what are Canadians to expect in the upcoming months.
So Parliament's back in late January. It will take some weeks to actually get a non-confidence vote onto the floor of the House of Commons. Then we'll see if Jagmeet Singh's latest promise of voting non-confidence was as insincere as his prior commitments to that effect.
When does his pension kick in?
In February. So he's now, basically, he said yesterday that he would put forward a non-confidence motion at the earliest opportunity. Well, that's likely to be March, which is...
Oh, that's convenient. Okay,
right
so that
after.
problem's off. So really,
That's right.
so March is the earliest.
Well, I mean, he can't.
As far as you can see, that election could be called.
Again,
Yeah,
Singh
I
will
forget
not
when.
vote
Like when was
non-confidence
he?
before he gets his pension, or at least he will not vote non-confidence in a way that sees the election happen before his pension kicks in. So we won't have an election before very late winter, early spring. Then there's the possibility that the Trudeau resigns and then goes to the Governor General and says we need to shut down Parliament, while the Liberal Party then chooses
Poilievre got his
a new replacement, a Trudeau 2.0.
Started
and so
or
there would
qualified
be,
for his
leadership race.
pension
God
in
knows how long that would
2010.
drag on for during.
You think approximately in March, no earlier than March, as far as you can foresee.
Yeah, probably. And during which
Well, he qualifies for his pension because he's been in the House of Commons for 6 years. Because that'll have been 6 years since the by-election he was first elected in, so he would start to qualify for it.
and we'd continue to flounder and twist in the wind. And by the way, you know, the liberal media is all saying, well, surely you wouldn't want to trigger an election during the liberal
15 years ago. Jesus. From the Rick Mercer report, December 23rd, 2009.
Recently, the entire country breathed a sigh of relief when the nation was pulled back from the brink of the federal election. But nobody breathed easier than Conservative Member of Parliament Pierre Poilievre, who will now qualify for a full pension the same month he turns 31. Pierre Poilievre, the workers of Canada salute you.
Congratulations, Pierre.
Yay, Pierre.
I don't have a pension.
Yes, very few Canadians qualify for a full pension at the age of 31. Well, in fact,
it's almost like I guess maybe I just don't, but like it's wild that he was this much on the radar that Rick Mercer would do an entire segment on him.
In fact, there really is only one, and that man, Pierre Poilievre, which is why we wanted to throw a party for Pierre and get some fun stories from people who have worked with Pierre before he became a member of Parliament. Now, unfortunately, we cannot find any evidence that he actually held what most of us would call a job. So if you worked with Pierre at an actual job in any capacity, say as a co-worker, please contact us with a witty story so we can honor a great Canadian. Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre, you loved him.
You can see that the evolution of how people have pronounced his name. There was a very interesting couple of weeks after he became leader where like you heard, because they hadn't really coalesced around Poilievre yet, so there was a lot of people saying Poilievre. I heard a bunch of people say Poilievre, and I was like, how is that what you got?
When he said natives in this country need to learn the value of hard work.
He said what?
And you laughed when he said we can't afford to amend EI to cover more workers.
That little
Whoop. And you will cheer when he gets his pension.
Am I paying for that?
Yes, you were. Pierre Poilievre, one hell of a guy. One heck of a pension.
leadership race. Excuse me, the Canadian people are not obliged.
Oh, this was the big clip that everyone was sharing.
During which time we'd continue to flounder and twist on a reserve. So we won't have an election before very late winter, early.
We'll give this some
spring.
lead time since everyone really likes.
Then there's
this,
the possibility
this
that
line.
the Trudeau resigns and then goes to the Governor General and says we need to shut down Parliament, while the Liberal Party then chooses a new replacement, a Trudeau 2.0. So there
Chris
would be a leadership race. God knows how long that would drag on for during.
You think approximately in March, no earlier than March, as far as you can foresee.
Yeah, probably.
Because the House doesn't even return until
flounder and twist
end
in
of
the
January.
wind. And by the way, you know, the Liberal media is all saying, well, surely you wouldn't want to trigger an election during a Liberal leadership race. Excuse me, the Canadian people are not obliged.
Excuse me?
41 million people are not obliged to wait around while this party sorts out its shit. Like, these guys could have got rid of Trudeau a year and a half ago. They knew he was a disaster then. And now they say, well, we're low in the polls, so we have to get rid of him. Now, you didn't care when he was just depriving single mothers of food for their kids, or doubling housing costs, or unleashing crime in neighborhoods across the country. But now you're really concerned about getting rid of him because your poll numbers are down and you want to keep your job. Sorry, that's not a good reason to paralyze the entire country, in the face, by the way, of a major negotiation with the incoming U.S. president, who enters with a massive and powerful mandate, and a man who has proven that he can spot weakness from a mile away. So the country should not be forced to wait for the Liberal Party to clean up its own mess. They've had plenty of time to do that. What we need now is certainty, and the only way that can come is through an election, so the people can decide.
And so who do you see as contenders on the Liberal side? I mean, Freeland, I think, is going to make a run for it, but Carney, do you think he's going to throw his hat in the ring? Now, he famously rejected the opportunity to become Trudeau's finance minister.
After accepting it.
Okay.
Well, so the chronology that we're led to believe, based on sources who've spoken about it to the media, is that Carney agreed to the job. Trudeau went to Freeland days before she was to introduce her
You
fall
must fucking
update,
love
said,
this story.
I'm going to be firing you to bring in Mark Carney. And then when that blew up with her unexpected premature resignation, then Carney looked at it and said, I don't want any part of this. And he crawled under his desk. And
what do you mean? What happened to David McGuinty prior to being put in cabinet? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, see, that was the thing where it's like I have no idea. I have no idea. I have no inside knowledge on that. All I have is rumors, and they're all sometimes conflicting. So I'm not even going to contribute to that. But I had heard that. I will say that's like, but it was, again, just in the rumor mill.
Oh, he was happy to.
What I will say is I heard a lot of like fairly good sources that like they were making some tweaks to that final cabinet shuffle until almost like not the last minute, but like it was there was some yeah. So that's what I know. Is that it was very like there were some last minute changes for sure. I don't know what they were, but I've heard that a couple of times.
Take the job when it looked like.
But obviously, like when the week starts off as it does, those musical chairs get very, very difficult.
Clear path, but then when it was a messier path, he hid from it.
But why would have he decided to take that job to begin with? Because
it's a good question.
Well, God, you can't imagine stepping into a more thankless role. I mean,
who would want to associate with these guys?
Well, Carney already has a reputation. It seems to me that if he has prime ministerial ambitions, he'd just wait for the Trudeau Liberals to cataclysmically degenerate even further and then step in as the savior.
Look, he's going to try and distance himself now, but here's the problem. He signed on as Trudeau's economic advisor. It's an official role he holds today. Now, he's going to make one of two arguments. One, he's going to say, yes, in fact, I was his economic advisor, and therefore I am responsible for the $62 billion deficit and the catastrophic growth and the rising cost of living. Or he's going to say, I wasn't really his advisor, I was just full of it. You know, he has to decide, was he lying to everybody when he claimed he was Trudeau's advisor? Or was he telling the truth? And either way, he's got a major political problem that he is now totally inseparable.
It's like, I want a Ness. And that's very funny. That's a very good pun, RSJ. I like it.
From the Trudeau record. He supports the carbon tax. He supports the attack on our energy sector. He told me in a parliamentary committee that he opposed Canadian pipelines, even though his company has invested in pipelines in the Middle East and in Brazil. You know, he is part of the Davos agenda. He's just every bit as radical as Trudeau. The only difference is he's got a nice banker's haircut and suit, and he wears navy blue socks rather than polka dot socks. But beyond the aesthetics, he shares Trudeau's entire ideology, and he represents the status quo.
Okay. So what do you see? Let's do this. I want to know what you see as, like, frankly speaking, I don't envy you your job, or the people, by the way, in the Trump administration, because it's very glamorous at the moment for them. But if they're going to cut government inefficiency in a serious manner, they're going to be doing hard administrative labor for a very long period of time. Now, you're going to take the helm of Canada when there are 5 dimensions of trouble brewing,
Davos
and
agenda.
More serious trouble. On
We already asked him
dimensions
how
than
he's
I've
going to
stop
himself from being become doing globalist things. Basically, I don't know, that's not the specific wording, but basically that in like one of the early segments. Yes, it was like, so we're at just 1:12:33. So here it is.
Okay, so there's a lot of distrust, generally speaking, in relationship to, I would say, establishment organization, well earned. Why should Canadians believe that the vision that you just laid out is something that you hold personally dear and not merely what would you say, a set of carefully calculated campaign slogans?
Well, I look back at every...
Oh, wait, no, that's
of
not...
carefully
where was
calculated campaign slogans.
Oh, where conservatives go wrong is the next one.
Back it up.
And I'm going to use the government. Having said that, they fall forward really a catastrophic energy policy. And the UK has apologized for it, conservative government, and they certainly didn't govern by anything approximating conservative principles. And so how do you feel about the probability that if the Conservatives in Canada take power, that they'll be enticed into this global utopian delusion?
Global utopian delusion. That was the word.
So many leaders, kind of regardless of their political stripe, what than I've ever seen plague Canada in my entire life.
Jumping
as a
back
Canadian.
to where we were.
And it's worse than that, because I suspect that the true picture is a lot more.
Yeah, because I had heard there was a bunch of people I had heard, like, obviously it was all sort of, there was like, it was basically all of the Ottawa area MPs were basically suggested as who might get sacrificed to give Carney a seat. So so it was basically like, if you pick an Ottawa area MP, and I heard a rumor about that, and it's like, do with that what you will, but I wouldn't put a lot of stock into any one of them, because it could be all of them or none of them. Who knows? Yeah, probably the least likely. Maybe Yasser, but I don't know, because he's always been a good soldier.
Than we know.
Yes.
Okay, so that's going to be dumped on you sometime in the next year. And so how are you going to deal with that? Like, how are you going to deal with the fact that the easiest thing to do for Canadians and for the remnants of the legacy media will be to wait until the Trudeau government collapses completely, dumps the economic mess on your shoulders, and then 2 months later proclaim that it's your fault.
Right.
Well, and it will be your responsibility at that point. And so, like,
they get the
what's
party, I get the hangover.
oh, you definitely are going to get the hangover. There's no doubt about that. And that's a formidable set of problems. Now, as we've already pointed out, Canada has a tremendous number of natural and cultural advantages. But still, like, there's a lot of, now you have a Senate that's packed with liberal progressives. Let's call them by their proper name.
No, they're independent.
You have a Senate that's packed with progressives. You have a judiciary
They're all
that's
independent, I
packed
swear.
with progressives. You have municipalities all across the country that are progressive. Even once you win, there's going to be a lot of opposition to your movement forward, and you're going to inherit all these problems. So, like,
Are you trying to dissuade me from?
I mean, he does, like, think about that. He makes a good point. Like, for as much as they have the wind behind their sails, not really to compare them to Labor, but there is a possibility that they could meet the same fate as Labor. As soon as they get in charge, all of the people who he says he's not like manipulating or making people angry. He's just sort of channeling it because people are already angry. But the thing is once he becomes the guy in charge, it'll become a lot less harder to channel that energy, that anger away from him as the guy in charge. And you sort of saw that with Labor, because I was like, where's that? There was one good clip from where, like, the BBC presenters are, like, moaning. They're like, it's just such a huge victory. And then what is Labor polling at right now? So I don't think it's great. Oh, I guess they're still doing not bad. Labor's polling at 33% right now, with Conservatives at 23%. But, like, I mean, oh no, those are the election results. Never mind. Oh, so at election, it was 33% for the Conservatives, 23%, with 412 seats and 121 seats for the Conservatives, 412 for Labor, obviously. Huge, massive majority. Now, currently, according to Politico EU polling, which is just the first one I pulled up, Labor is down at 27%, and Conservatives are up at 25%. Reform is 22%. Lib Dems, 11%. Greens, 8%. Scottish National Party, 2%. And Plaid Cymru at 1%. I don't think I'd said that second word right. Ooh, Starmer's so when he was elected, Starmer's disapproval was 33% and his approval was 61%. Currently, it's almost flipped, where his disapproval is 62% and approval is 30%. I should have had this on the screen. Why am I not showing you this? I'm so bad, guys. I apologize. But yeah, just look at that. Like, not really comparing the two in, like, policy or choices, but, like, I don't know if this is entirely Labor's fault. I just think the people that were really pissed when the Conservatives were in power didn't stop being pissed just because Labor took over.
Taking
it's
this
rough,
job.
man. And so, I mean, I want to
Cymru?
know
Played Cymru?
Like,
all right.
why you think you're
I hope you're not tricking me.
And it's been 2.5 years since we've had this conversation like this.
Well,
like,
yes, probably. That's fair.
What's your plan, and who are the people you have?
I'm not saying it's not their fault. I'm just saying there's probably also just, like, people who were already pissed didn't stop being pissed just because there was a new government. Like, didn't magically make their lives better.
Implement your plan, and why do you have Why should Canadians have confidence in them?
So my plan is pretty clear. We're going to cut bureaucracy, cut the consultants, cut foreign aid, cut back on corporate welfare to large corporations. We're going to use the savings to bring down the deficit and taxes, and unleash the free enterprise system. We're going to repeal C-69, that's the anti-energy law, to cause a massive resource boom in our country.
Labor does?
And make it attractive for business to do the value-added work here in this country. So part of it's going to be growing out of this mess. You know, if you take the debt to GDP ratio, you have the denominator has to grow. And that's why we need a bigger, more powerful GDP that can fund our country and diminish the relative size of our debts. We're going to bring back a monetary discipline to bring down inflation, stop the money printing, and we're going to incentivize the municipalities to get building. But it's going to be a big fight with all of these things because there are so many vested interests that will be trying to hold us back. So many small economic groups that have profited off the status quo, they will be fighting against me. And I'm going to have to put out a call to Canadians that they have to stay politically active. They can't assume that simply by changing by voting in an election that everything is going to, all the problems are going to reverse instantaneously. Like I will need people to put pressure on the Senate to adopt my economic reforms. I will need people to put pressure on their mayors and local councillors to get out of the way and let us build homes. I will need businesses to actually do their part. I mean, our corporate Canada is so completely incompetent when it comes to politics. They're going to have to start to fight for the policies that are good for their workers more aggressively. And I've said that to them. They need to fire their incompetent lobbyists and actually go to the people and make the arguments for the reforms that I'm talking about. And
are the businesses that you're talking to, these are larger businesses, I presume, do they
understand? You watched all of Starship Troopers. Yeah, well, I mean, I've been also yapping a lot, so that's delayed it. Because this is only an hour and 15 minutes into this, and we've been going for 2.5 hours, so partially my own fault.
They're starting to understand, because they know that what they have been doing hasn't worked.
Well, the energy companies have been towing the green line, which seems to me to be a very bad strategy.
They're idiots. They're complete idiots. The big five oil companies in Canada have idiot lobbyists. They have brilliant workers, incredible workers, but idiot lobbyists. And they've been trying to suck up for the last 10 years and did nothing to support the right policies in the prior years. So that's going to have to change. The developers are going to have to inform people in the cities why housing costs so much. You know, how is it possible that Olivia Chow can raise development charges by 30% and nobody in Toronto knows about it? Well, it's because the builders have not made it known. And so the builders take the blame when the housing costs go up. I mean, sorry, you have to actually, politics is a participation sport, not a spectator sport. So our business community is going to have to step up and make the argument for these changes, or I will come up against a lot of political barriers. So my message to everyone is, God willing, I will triumph in the election, but the people who want the changes that I'm talking about are going to have to stay politically active to push them through and over the finish line.
So one of the remarkable things that transpired on the American front, and rather precipitously in the last 3 months of the election, was that a remarkable team of people aggregated themselves.
Well, I mean, the argument he's making is more just like, if you want your things to be done by, like, if you want my government to do things that will benefit you, don't send me lobbyists. Go out and convince Canadians so that when my government does it, it'll be something Canadians want and not just me. So it's, you can read it as cynical, you can read it as that's sort of how democracy is supposed to work. But it's like, that's not a terrible strategy. Yeah, no, like, that's like my whole thing about what I was like when I was just saying that about like there's a possibility you could have the same fate as labor. Him saying that this isn't a spectator sport, things aren't going to get better instantaneously. You need to be involved and go out and like, I don't know if he said the word agitate, but he might as well have said agitate for the things you want. Like, that's solid advice. Like, that's an honest, like, sort of thing to say to voters. Like, I'm not, just because I become prime minister, all of the things I've been talking about aren't going to magically disappear. I'm not going to be able to flick of a button be able to change a bunch of things. There's going to have to be, like, participation. Like, even with the thing where he's talking about the business leaders or whatever, that's still him on its face arguing for greater public political participation. Say that 5 times fast.
Trump. And that was heartening because each of those people had their own track record of stellar accomplishment, but it also helped decrease people's concern about Trump as a individualistic autocrat, let's say. Now, you're very well known in Canada, I would say, and increasingly internationally. I'd say that's less true of your team. And so could you tell us, like, can you point to some people who will be key in your administration and highlight I'd like to know what you think their strengths are. So let's walk through the core elements of your team. And also, I'd like to hear a little bit about where you think you guys still need to learn and might need further development.
Well, listen, I'll go through some of the names. For example, we've got Andrew Scheer, who was the party leader a few years ago, but he actually did a good job as party leader and learned a lot in that process. He was the Speaker of the House, and that's important in a House leader. He knows the rules of the game, because a lot of the stuff that gets done or doesn't get done is the result of procedural.
I mean, it kind of is. There's a lot of people
So
who are really
you need
checked
someone
out
who
of politics or
understands
don't want to have
procedure,
anything to
and
do with it.
He understands it better than anyone. That's why I think our House strategy has been so successful. One of my former leadership rivals, Dr. Leslie Lewis, is our shadow minister of infrastructure, and she's doing a great job in talking about how we can rebuild the infrastructure of the country. I think we've got newcomers like Jamil Javani, who was recently elected in an overwhelming mandate in Durham, and Melissa Lanceman, our deputy leader, extremely well liked in Toronto, very well known across the country. She's been a terrific communicator, very smart. So these are very good people, and we're of course recruiting a whole army of candidates who are not yet elected in our non-held ridings that will help me not just win the election, but govern if, God willing, we do.
Who do you have on the energy side, federally?
Well, we're kind of lucky in that respect that we have a huge Western caucus, right? We dominate in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So, there's very few MPs in our Prairie caucus that don't understand energy, because they all grew up with it, as you recall from your time as an Albertan. And they know what to do. And I've also planned to.
Yeah, and like
I've talked to Daniel Smith.
Most Canadians don't tune into politics until like
and
the leaders' debate during the election.
Saskatchewan. I said, look, you guys need to be ready for it. When I win. We need your help to reform the approval laws so that we can get some resource projects going like immediately. I won't speak for her, but Premier Smith from Alberta, who's a fantastic leader, has said she's happy to help, and she knows.
I think there are. I can't name off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure nuclear is going to play fairly heavy in like the Conservatives. Like he said that just there, or a while ago, earlier in the segment, he mentioned that we have one of the largest uranium deposits in the world. And I remember when I was at the Canada Strong and Free and free Poilievre. Where is it? Because if you, I don't know if you guys probably don't have a Hill Times subscription, so this isn't going to help you. But if you read through this, I feel like it'll be very informative. So quoting from his speech, common sense conservatives understand that the best way to add zero emitting baseload electricity across our country is by expanding and safely approving CANDU, Canada deuterium uranium, and small modular reactors, Poilievre said, promising that his government would, quote, unleash the power of our atoms for clean and low-cost energy for our people. And then next thing is, finally, Poilievre explained how the liquefaction of Canada's over 20,000 cubic feet of natural gas could reduce global emissions 3 times the 0.7 billion tons of CO2 emissions Canada is responsible for each year by exporting it to India, reducing its emissions by 2.5 billion tons compared to its current use of coal-fired power plants. Yes.
It's the energy sector inside out and backwards. And I'm talking to, for example, Greg Rickford from Northern Ontario. He's the guy who's been championing the Ring of Fire, which is just the massive collection of minerals in Northern Ontario that we've been talking about mining for the last 15 years and hasn't been able to get approved. He's the one who's got the plan to approve that. So I've been talking with him a lot. And you'll see more names come forward as we get closer to the election.
Okay. So your fundamental plan is to eliminate obstacles, let's say bureaucratic obstacles, procedure obstacles, and to facilitate growth out of Canada's current malaise.
Yes.
And you see that a lot of what you've talked about today is on the resource front. And you have premiers who are going to back that. Canada is also a sophisticated nation. We're more than hewers of wood, let's say, and drawers of water and purveyors of energy.
Who's in charge of bulk memberships at the Hill Times? I'm going to ask Carleton Library to buy bulk.
Why don't you talk a little bit about,
up.
Let's presume, for the sake of argument, that you have 2 terms, 8 years, let's say, which is not an...
If you go to the website and go to contact, if you go to the website, RSJ, and go to contact us, that would be subscriptions and sales department. So probably one of our sales executives.
Reasonable prognostication if things go at least moderately well, right? And so 8 years from now, what is the Canada that
we'll dig up the peat fields
planning to lead? What does it look like?
I think it's a country where any young person can say, this is the place to start a business. This is the place to take a risk and break through. It's a country where a country of adventurers, explorers, inventors, workers, people who are extremely ambitious and rewarded for that ambition. It's a place where not only do we graduate brilliant engineers in Kitchener-Waterloo, where we do, some of the best in the world, but they say, hell no, I'm not leaving Canada. This is the place to be. This is where the best tech company is hiring the next 700 people. This is where I can get the best salary, and this is where I can keep most of my paycheck. Oh, and by the way, it's now affordable for me to buy a home here in Canada. It's a place where...
So that's the best rejoinder to the Americans, I would say.
Yes.
Fundamentally, for Canadians who are concerned about undue American influence on Canada, the best possible rejoinder would be to make Canada a place so welcome to entrepreneurs that the U.S. would pale in comparison. That's a tall order because the Americans are deeply entrepreneurial and have a very business-friendly society, right? Like at every level, right? They reward entrepreneurial activity. Okay,
so I want to see that we for the first 14 years of this century, Canada had more American investment than America had Canadian investment. So in other words, we were winning the tug of war of capitalism with the greatest capitalist economy the world has ever seen. And then from 2015 to present, there's been a net outflow of $500 billion measured in USD from Canada to the US. It's astonishing.
Since when?
In the last 10 years.
$500 billion.
$500 billion, and that's in American dollars. So that's 700-ish billion in Canadian, which is the equivalent of about a quarter of our economy has just left its Canadian investment. I mean, the government admits it. The pension funds are now investing in the States. Canadian pension funds, Canadian RRSPs, they're all invested because that's where you get the best return right now. I want to bring that back.
Right, so that's like $40,000 per Canadian, something like that.
That's right. So why don't we can bring that back?
$20,000 per Canadian, $80,000 per family.
But let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. Let's make this the best place to get a return on your investment. Let's make this the best place in the world to do business, to bring hundreds of billions of dollars of investment to dig mines, build pipelines, business centers, new tech companies, drill, high-tech enterprises that you not only invent here, but you actually keep here, because it's not just a great place to lose money, but a great place to make money. That is the bright, optimistic future I see. I'm looking at models for this. You look at Ireland. Ireland, my grandfather came from Ireland, about half a century ago, because Ireland was too poor. Well, now Ireland's per capita GDP is twice Canada's. They're now $100,000 per capita GDP. In Canada, it's $50,000. So what did the Irish do? They cut taxes. They shrunk government. Government is only 23% of the economy, 40% here.
Right.
And so
they made it tech-friendly.
Made it very tech-friendly. So like 70% of the American, 75% of the Irish economy,
GDP is fake.
is free enterprise.
Strong take,
and that's why they're
Serafina.
just cooking with gas. Look at Singapore, Switzerland. There are countless. Israel, after the 90s, becoming a startup nation. The recipe book is already written. We know what to do. Unleash free enterprise, remove the constraints, cut taxes, and allow people to prosper.
Yeah, well, I've heard great things about the tech graduates from the University of Waterloo.
They're phenomenal.
People in the people I know in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
They're our biggest export right now.
Yeah, well, they feel that they're the equivalent, at least, of the graduates of the Indian Institute of Technology. And I mean, the Indians have had a massive influence in Silicon Valley. And so Canadians.
No, well, actually, Progressive Canuck, one of his big things is, and I can go back to the same thing from his pitch. He's gonna do his idea of First Nations reconciliation is allowing them to develop their own resources. He's gonna do sort of he's sort of promising the same hands-off approach he would give to the municipalities and provinces. To quote him, Poilievre pointed to the Squamish Nation's wood fiber LNG as a further example of the environmental benefits of liquefaction. This is also, again, part of his environmental thing. The project is transforming an abandoned contaminated pulp and paper mill into a net zero LNG export facility. Quote, First Nations people were banned from even working there as janitors, and now they're working as executives and owners, Poilievre explained. The plant will be good for the earth, and it will bring home powerful paychecks for the people, for their people and our countries. And they had at this Canada Strong and Free, they had a whole engaging First Nations panel as well that friend of the show Jennifer L was on and was quite good at.
That's only one place where Canadians are not making nearly the use of their resources that they could. That's on the human resource front with regard to engineers.
Well, you think you graduate from Waterloo and you can pay 53% tax in Canada, or 18 or 19 in Texas. You can pay $1.5 million for an average house in Canada, or you can buy a castle for $400,000 in the States. You can make Canadian dollars, which is 69-cent equivalent of the US dollar, or you can make an American dollar. It's unfortunately, the pull is very hard, but why don't we get us pulling in the other direction? Why don't we make this the most attractive place for these brilliant minds to come out of these schools and build it here and keep it here? And I think we can do that.
Okay, so what are you going to do when you take office? Like what does that look like practically? So what could Canadians watch you do in the first months of your administration that would help reassure them that this is going to happen?
This is real. Well, first of all, I'm going to axe the carbon tax. It's been kind of an epic commitment that I've made. It's iconic, and so I have to follow through on it.
It's iconic.
And that will signal to the country that I'm serious. Second, we want to get rid of the GST on new homes and make past changes that aggressively incentivize municipalities to get the building started. That has to happen immediately for people to notice any difference in the cost of housing by the time I get through my 4th year. We will have rapid introduction of the biggest crackdown on crime in Canadian history. A massive crackdown.
And what'll that look like? A crackdown on crime?
Basically, habitual offenders will not get out of jail anymore.
Right. 1% of the criminals commit 65% of the crimes.
Is that right?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. Well, criminals specialize just like everyone else, right? And the best predictor of offense in the future is repeat offense in the past.
Right.
Right. So
in Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times in 1 year.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly a consequence of that specialization.
When we did this last time in the Harper government, we actually reduced crime by 25%. But interesting, this is a very big surprise. Incarcerations.
Just no bail.
Because
and getting rid of
the people that we kept in prison were in and out anyway. It was like the Hotel California.
Yes. I did a whole story on a bunch of prison farms. Like a whole series on it. Well, not a series, but a bunch of stories where there's one in Kingston where they were it was an abattoir, like a slaughterhouse. And they had prisoners working at the slaughterhouse. And then there was another one where there was at the same prison, or I think at a nearby prison in the same city, where they were producing goat milk to be sold to China. And that caused a lot of ruckus. Here's the report that sort of some of the reporting is based on that you can read for free. So the abattoir has been closed since September 2022, but they've never actually committed that they won't reopen it. And a lot of businesses, especially farmers and stuff in the area, want it reopened. This is the goat milk story.
They were checking out, but they were never really leaving. So we had to basically save them a bed. But secondly, the small-time offenders were actually deterred. You know, all of the so-called experts say deterrents don't work. No, they do work.
Yeah, the best deterrent turns out to be probability of conviction rather than length of sentence.
And right now, though, it's worse than that. Even if you have a probability of conviction, there's a certainty that there won't be any real penalty.
Right.
So it doesn't
that's not
matter.
a real conviction.
That's not a real conviction. There's going to be a very serious crackdown on crime.
Immigration? What's the scoop there?
Oh, we have to slow down the numbers. There's no doubt about it. We have to end the fraud in the International Student and the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. We have to...
Well, Canada historically had a very effective immigration policy.
We just have to get back to the best system in the world, which we had for 150 years. Even in the United States, both Democrats and Republicans used to say, they'd get up at a microphone and claim they were going to replicate our system because it was an undeniable success. Immigration was not even controversial before Justin Trudeau because it was so well managed here
that's completely
for
true.
so long. And we just need to get
Yeah, it
back
was
to that
clearly
system.
viewed as a net benefit by the immigrants and by Canadians.
Absolutely.
Right.
And in fact, the support
Oh, that
for
is
immigration was strongest in kind of the rural, resource, and agricultural communities where the labor was most needed and welcomed. And people integrated. They arrived here, and while we said to people, look, bring your traditions and culture and your stories, but leave the problems at the door. And this is, by the way, a history for Canada that goes back hundreds of years.
This
I mean,
is
the
from May of
Protestants
last year.
and Catholics were ripping each other's eyeballs out in Europe for centuries. And then they came to Canada and they got along. They ultimately ended up intermarrying and integrating completely. And, whether you were an Orangeman or a...
The Jubilee riots of 1875 were an outbreak of Protestant Catholic sectarian violence in Toronto. The Gavazi riots, were two major disturbances that occurred in Canada in 1853. Just immediately. Just, if there's anything I know about the Catholics and the Protestants as a Scottish, not Protestant, but Presbyterian, but who has an Irish grandfather. Yeah. This is and then he so there's a very rosy picture of Canada's past he does paint.
Or a Catholic, Irish Catholic, you over time, you got along with your neighbor. And, in the last 9 years, we've seen that's come apart. The foreign conflicts are now spilling onto our streets. I want to put an end to that. I want to say, look, we're not interested in the world's ethno-cultural conflicts. We welcome people.
Shadow side of multiculturalism.
We welcome the people who come from places that have been afflicted by war.
Leave the war. I had a feeling that would be true. That frankly, they did not get along as well as Poilievre seems to be presenting.
So, by getting back to a common sense of values and identity, and reminding people that when they get here, they are Canadian first, Canada first. Leave the hyphens. We don't need to be a hyphenated society. We need to be...
So we can abandon the post-nationalist state rhetoric and presume that Canada does have a Western identity founded on the a priori principles of Western democracies, and that is a uniting ethos for the people that come here.
And that we owe a debt of gratitude to the giants who came before us, who fought in wars, who laid down a parliamentary democracy, and who left us behind this incredible inheritance. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be grateful again, and we're going to inculcate the values of gratitude for our incredible history.
That we banned
build up
St.
the country,
Patrick's Day parades till the 60s.
Celebrate what we have in common rather than obsessing about what divides us. Focusing on the shared values that make us all Canadian. And I think in so doing, we can, and by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Invented
in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be.
Right.
And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race, right? That was something we 100% did not need in Canada, right? We basically, what would you say, imported and invented racism in Canada, right? As a consequence of policy.
Wokeism seeks to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes. But we're going to get back to the basic principle that people are judged based on their...
I mean, I don't think it was just like a single guy. Or maybe it was a dude who just coded it, but isn't Twitch... Wasn't it a site before... it was called something else before it was called Twitch, wasn't it?
Individual character and humanity rather than by their group identity. And that is actually, ironically, the most unifying thing we can do to bring our country back together. And as Lincoln put it,
Yes,
to
that
bind
was
up
it.
the
Justin
nation's wounds.
TV.
All right, so we started the conversation with a description of the manner in which the intergenerational compact that makes up the nation had started to become violated or frayed, right? You said that young people in particular, you talked about middle-aged people and business people as well, but you said young people felt that even if they did act responsibly, and even if they did undertake the adventure of their life, the entrepreneurial adventure of their life, that the probability that they would be successful, even in the centrist middle class
Really?
manner that Canadians
I
had
didn't know that.
become
That's
accustomed to, that had become
Orange Man Day
an
and-
unlikely.
I mean, I
that
guess
had
it
become an
shouldn't be
unlikely
surprising.
outcome. And so your vision, it sounds to me, is to at minimum restore that social contract so that young people who are interested in adopting responsibility and taking some risk can be assured that that will meet with success. And you think that you have the team that's in place that can make that possible. Yeah. So what have you, let's close with this. How are you a different person than you were 2.5 years ago?
I mean, I
would
guess
say
that's
I'm
fair.
tougher.
What does that mean?
Well,
Tougher?
it's
in
like
what
you
way?
watch a boxing match and you see these guys get hit again and again and again. You say, how is it that you can take
You
a punch? The
invented
average
something,
person
you should
takes
get
a punch
respect.
like that on the street. They
Though I don't know
collapse.
if-
Well, once you've taken a
Just
punch,
if
you
you
know how to
invent-
take
it
a
depends on
punch.
what you invent.
And when you run for leader of the oldest and biggest political party in the country, and you're trying to challenge the vested interests,
I guess so.
then you're going
If
to
it makes
take a
your
lot of
life
punches.
better.
And I have, and I've withstood those punches, and as a result, I feel stronger now than I did when I started.
Okay.
I don't feel I have beaten down. I feel emboldened and strengthened from that running through that gauntlet.
Right, right. So that hasn't demoralized you.
Not at all. No, in fact, to the contrary, I feel more invigorated than ever before.
Why?
Because I think, because I have a mission. There, you know, I think was it Frankel that said, "He who has a why can withstand any what."
Anyhow.
Anyhow.
Anyhow, yeah.
And I have a why. I know why I'm doing this.
Oh.
And I want to get this done for the country, and I want to
Someone who
leave behind
has a
the
why.
opportunity
Not
for
any why.
every other Canadian, the chance I had as a kid. And I know it's personal for me.
No, I mean, I don't
come
know if you have
from-
to just invent something. If you produce something that makes people's lives better or helps them live their lives.
A privileged,
Even if you just do it, like have a
or
service
wealthy
job.
background. I was adopted by school teachers, grew up in a normal suburban neighborhood. We didn't always have money, but I was able to get here.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife's the same story. You know, she came here with nothing, and she's had a great life. Her family's had a great life. I love that about this
That's a
country.
good question. Who did invent stairs?
The idea that I could restore that.
I don't know if there was
as
just
my
a guy
life's
who
work
invented
for other
stairs.
people, to me, that is exhilarating. That excites me. If that could be the only thing I do with my career, that would be an incredibly rewarding outcome.
Right, right. All right. Well, thank you, sir. It's very good to talk to you. Hopefully it won't be 2.5
Michael
years
East
before we
there.
speak again.
No, we should do it
publicly.
more often.
Yeah, well, it's a
And-
very good forum for apprising people of
A
your
regular
plans and your
podcast
progress,
between
you
these
know.
two.
Also, I, on behalf of all Canadians, want to thank you for
Yeah,
your
fuck
immense
that guy.
courage and the personal political and non-political price that you have paid for standing up for your convictions and defending freedom of speech. Because I know you have paid a very big price for that, but you have never bent, you have never backed down, you've had a spine of steel. And there are countless other people who will have the freedom to express themselves because you paid the price for them. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you, sir. It's been a privilege, far more than a price, definitely, and it continues to be that way. All right, so for everybody watching and listening, I'm going to talk.
I mean,
to
he
Mr.
probably
Poilievre
Vivek could have
for
probably
another
said
half
it
an
in a
hour on
better
the Daily
way.
Wire side, as you know, and I think probably
There's
what we'll
another
do
half an hour of this?
there is drill down a little bit
On Daily Wire?
Canada-U.S. relations.
God damn, I'm not
audience
paying
is
Daily Wire money
very
to get the
American-oriented,
extra
and
30
so that
minutes.
seems to be perfectly appropriate.
I
and
won't put
something
you
that
guys
we didn't
through it
cover in any
either.
great detail on this side of the conversation, and seems particularly apropos given that Trump has been making jokes about Trudeau being the governor of the 51st state, and has also threatened to put 25% tariffs on Canada, which I think is more of a ploy than a genuine threat, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed. And so we'll talk about the trials for Canada of having the Americans as their southern neighbor, but also the immense opportunities that go along with that. So, well, we occupy the same continent, so it'd probably be best if we got along, swimmingly. So that's what we'll discuss on the Daily Wire side. So be more than welcome to join us there. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you.